Now open in public session. We do have quorum. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'm going to advise all of those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. And it is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. I'm going to ask members for any declarations of interest. Are there any new matters to declare, not declared at our first meeting, that are relevant to any matters under discussion this week? Okay, members, I just want to bring your attention to a very significant matter this week. We have to say farewell to our very own Gillian Baker, our assistant clerk here, who has been at the Assembly for over 23 years. 23 years ago, I was just a boy, Gillian, just to have it on record there. But thank you for your service on behalf of everyone in the committee. It's been a joy to work with you. It really has, and really wish you a very happy, successful, fun-filled, adventurous retirement.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, guys. Are the members aware of any apologies? I have a few things I just need to note that we have, for instance, Anya Murphy and Nicola Brogan joining us via Zoom. Patsy is running a little bit late. There's an issue at his constituency that he's attending to, but he does intend to be with us. Nothing else? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2, which is chairperson's business. Item 1, I would like to highlight that yesterday I visited Moy Park, or Pilgrims in Craigavon, in my capacity as an MLA. And then the issue of planning restrictions was one of the matters that was discussed, and the impact that it's having on the ability of the company perhaps to expand and hold on to workers. As a result, this weekend they are in the process of so probably job losses. They showed me round work solutions to potentially exceed ammonia reductions in the buildings that they are planning and future-proofing. So I don't know if any members have had any other conversations with them, but I think we will be engaging with them in the not-too-distant future. Members content? Thank you. Item number 2, after last week's unprecedented storms, I would like to raise the issue of potential of some work from the department maybe to do in regard to farmers and growers linked to ongoing food security. I'm also aware of correspondence that I received in a constituency capacity, not as chair, of NIE's network running through farming land, the impact it has in around fallen trees and all of those type of things. And maybe we could, I'd be interested in, I was speaking to Patsy about this morning actually, when he said that he'd be a wee bit late, of maybe understanding a wee bit more about tree planting and those type of activities in and around the NIE network that runs through the farmers' lands and stuff, just to see how we can mitigate that against that in the future if the planning matters are maybe, they might be already captured. I just don't know. I'd like to find out a wee bit more about that in terms of the vicinity of planting trees in around Declan.
Chair, I was going to mention it under AOB, but I might mention it now. Just in relation to the storm, like it's been absolutely unprecedented, and I do feel that it has had a disproportionate impact on rural areas. And like there's lots of constituents, my constituents who are still messaging me today who are still out, and I just would question how rural-proofed the operations and procedures are of NIE, not at ground level but at strategic level. So at some point in the future I would like potentially to get NIE to come before the committee to discuss this, because like under the Rural Needs Act, like the new companies and providers need to recognise exceptional situations and exceptional conditions in rural areas. And I just think that not the time now, but whenever the people are restored, we need to have the conversation, I think, with NIE to find out how rural-proofed they are in terms of their operations and how they implement the Rural Needs Act.
I totally agree with you, because we do know in terms of the provisions of everyday life, the impact on those rural dwellers in terms of accessing of a normal day, just transport networks, schools, health facilities, and then when we get an incident, I guess, albeit unprecedented, but we are being told by all of those experts that we're going to get more of them. And that being the case, the review, hopefully it'll be an executive-wide review, and I suspect that we will have our part to play in that, in that regard. So whilst there's an impact on farmers and farming and food security, is absolutely that same impact on rural dwellers. And like you in my constituency, and I'm sure other MLAs here too, will have people that are still without power. And the other issue that came up last week, and this is an ongoing one, is the mobile network actually too, because we've become so dependent for communications and even keeping in touch with families and friends. There's less use of the BT fibrous lines, and we're now, and even before the storm last week, there were 2 networks, I think it was 3 and O2. Particularly in rural areas, we're struggling to give. I suffered from early on Thursday, even before the storm.
Thursday.
Yeah. So that there, I think maybe it's something we could also pull into the same assessment when we do it in the not too distant future, maybe. Yeah.
I just want to say, I certainly want to just obviously commend the workers on the ground. Like there's NIE and other workers on the ground and up poles in the worst conditions and to restore our energy, and they've been working around the clock. So certainly nothing to do
I
with
agree.
them. It's to do with at a very strategic level about how contingencies can be put in place to address the exceptional conditions that we have in isolated rural areas.
Yeah, no, and to finish, just before bringing in John, just finish the point that it has to be made. Those people who respond on behalf of NI in this storm come from houses like our own.
Yep.
Where their own families were left without power, and have went without sleep. Many of them putting in long hours to get us reconnected. John, you indicated.
Yeah,
there.
Chair, thank you, and thank the Vice Chair for raising that, and I agree with what he said. And also appreciate the fact that he made a point of saying that we are conscious of the effort made by NIE officials and contractors in, quite frankly, dangerous conditions right through this entire episode. I, with colleagues across County Antrim, met them on Saturday afternoon for a quick update meeting, and it certainly put it into perspective that I think on Friday they said they'd had 68,000 calls in one day. Now that is an enormous task for any organisation to handle at any time. However, I was able to respectfully put the position to them that relates directly to our discussions hopefully in the future, that people living in rural areas, if they're likely to be off regarding power for longer, and that was the case as we know and still is, are less likely to have a neighbour within reach or a neighbour who might be aware of their needs if they're particular health needs. So there are particular needs in rural areas that don't always apply automatically in urban areas.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you, John. Thank you, members. Okay, item number 3 then. I refer you to pages 4 to 5 of the table papers for the press release issued on Tuesday by DAERA on the first meeting of the TB Partnership Steering Group. Members, I would like to know if Brandur is representing both DAERA and AFBI on the group, as otherwise AFBI are not mentioned in the membership. And would you be content if I seek that query? AFBI don't seem to be mentioned there. Also, I'd like to highlight a farmer that I spoke to regarding the work he still has to put into his herd, where he has TB. I spoke about this in member statements this week, around the matter that he still has to feed the cattle, still has to milk them. At cost, effort. So this relates really in terms of the speed that we react to a herd that has been indicated by the vet that it's going to be destroyed, how quickly that happens, and the ongoing pressure that puts on farms. So I'm going to make some comments in that regard, that in terms of a written response, if members are minded that that's okay. Yep. Is it okay, William? Do you want to come in there?
TB is a difficult disease for farmers. Very few herds are bought out completely, but as the ongoing situation have been closed, and maybe 1 or 2 animals continuing to keep the herd down can be very frustrating and difficult for farms.
Yeah, well, absolutely, totally. It's a much broader impact. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, excuse me. Is that a letter? You want a letter written just to highlight that?
Yeah, I think
response?
I'm sure DAERA will have picked it up in member statements just making the committee aware, and if the committee are content that they'll say that we've mentioned it and that some committee issue with it. Okay. Members, refer to pages 5 to 12 of the pack for the draft minutes dated 23rd of January. If you've had a chance to look at those, can I ask if you're content with the minutes as drafted? And if you are, I'll sign them. Members content?
I'm content, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, matters arising. Matters arising number 1. I refer you to correspondence from the Minister dated the 27th of January, pages 22 to 26 of the papers regarding fair pricing and the food supply chain. Members, this is in response to our letter dated the 17th of January, advising the Minister about the correspondence we received on the 14th of January from DEFRA, the Minister of State, on measures being taken by DEFRA to improve fair pricing in the food supply chain. We considered the response to the DEFRA letter from Farmers for Action last week. Members, Minister Muir states that he welcomes the UK Government's confirmation that it would further advance work on supply chain fairness using the fair dealing powers in the Agriculture Act 2020. Members, the Minister also states that the regulation of contractual relations is a reserved matter. However, his department has been engaging for some years with counterparts in DEFRA in Scotland and Wales on the development of the UK fair dealing legislation and related policy proposals. DARE has also liaised with local industry stakeholders to identify issues for Northern Ireland and to ensure local needs are properly addressed in the UK-wide policy and legislation. They have also participated in introductory meetings with the UK Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator and the Irish Agri-Food Regulators team. Members, the Minister also states that he has raised the issue of supply chain fairness and the scope for enhanced collaboration with his ministerial colleagues at the UK Interministerial Group meeting. Furthermore, he has recently asked local farming representatives for their views regarding making supply chain fairness better for primary producers. The Minister states that he will continue to engage proactively with all of our UK counterparts to secure better protections for local farmers and growers. Members, this response feeds into our bank of due diligence work on the issues raised by Farmers for Action, and we will need to have a conversation on our position in due course. However, at this stage, it did occur to me, and I was curious why the Minister didn't mention this ongoing work with DEFRA, Scotland and Wales, on the development of the UK fair dealing legislation and related policy proposals when we did write to him on the 25th of October, asking him to comment on the Farmers for Action proposed bill. As it would seem, there are connections between his work on fair dealings and some of the issues of concern to Farmers for Action and farmers across Northern Ireland. So, members, without wishing to continue these matters indefinitely, I propose a few actions on the back of this response in order that we are clear on the likely impact of these regulations on the concerns raised. I'm going to suggest that we write back to the Minister to delve deeper into the matter and query what specific asks DARE has made for Northern Ireland of the forthcoming fair dealing regulations, including the timescale for the introduction of the regulations and how DARE ensure that any UK-wide fair dealing regulations are tailored to meet any NI-specific need. Also, I propose that we consider asking the Minister as to what the ERA Committee could proactively do to support the Minister in this area. That's a significant piece of work that we should be doing. And I would also like to include a query on what specific supply chain issues did the Minister raise at the UK Interministerial Group meeting in November 2024, and how did these issues compare to the situations in England, Scotland and Wales, so that we as a committee can also benchmark. Are members content with those queries, questions? Yep. Thank you, members. Okay, agenda item 5, oral briefing from the Development Trust's NI, that is the Rural Assets Policy and Practice Insights from Northern Ireland. Members, I refer you to pages 27 to 65 of the pack for this item. The report entitled Rural Assets Policy and Practice Insights from Northern Ireland. The study aims to understand the impacts of the processes of community asset acquisition upon the empowerment, resilience and wellbeing of rural communities. Members, Development Trust NI, DTNI, serves as a network and advocate for community anchor organisations across Northern Ireland seeking to promote the principles of community development and the social economy. DTNI work with local communities, government and the voluntary sector to promote policy reform and programmes that advance community ownership, participation rights and local economic development. Members, I welcome the following representatives from DTNI to brief the committee on the report and to answer any questions. And I'm sorry that you might have been waiting a wee bit longer than you maybe thought this morning as I read through the Chair's business. But I want to welcome Mr. Charlie Fisher, CEO of DTNI, Dr. Danny Hutchin, Eunice Centre for Social Business and Health, Glasgow Caledonian University, and Mr. Liam O'Hagan, board member of DTNI. Is that correct? Yep. Excellent. Okay, the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, thanks for the invitation to come along and to present to you and talk to you about some of our work, in particular to talk to you about the report on rural assets. I hope you all did receive a hard copy, because I left hard copies out yesterday with the post office or the post room downstairs, so they should be in your pigeonholes. They're all there. So you've covered really like largely who we are, Robbie, in terms of DTNI is a network of community development trusts and associations working across Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland. We're one of 4 UK networks as well. And we've been charged with providing support to the third sector that have got an interest in developing an asset base and taking forward the Northern Ireland Executive's policy framework on community asset transfer. So as part of that wide work, we avail of whatever opportunities present themselves to make the case for community ownership, both in an urban, peri-urban and rural setting, and we've been doing that for several years. I just want to, I'll come back to this, but I want to make the point that this has been sort of made easier, if you like, when rural communities in particular have had an opportunity to avail of resources to take this agenda further forward. And we really haven't had any resources for this agenda in the north of Ireland for the past decade since the Social Investment Fund. The Community Ownership Fund that was run from Westminster in recent years was reasonably successful for organisations here in the north of Ireland. We had over 201 expressions of interest from groups from across the north in that fund. We supported 41 groups make an application successfully and draw a total of 11.69 million from that. 7% of the total of the fund that was available, and I think 2.8% was expected to come to the north. We managed to accrue 7.7% of the total fund. So the demand is phenomenal, and I can come back to that in questions as well in terms of the value in that. But in taking our work forward, as I said, we look to inform policy thinking and policy action around ownership as well. And so it was a great opportunity for us when Dr. Danny Hutchin from the Unit Centre in Glasgow, Caledonian University, approached us about working with DTNI and working with one of our members, and Liam, who's also on my board, is also the chairman of Grow the Glens and one of our members, and the case study and the report itself. So without sort of taking up too much time, I suppose we'll just maybe pass to Danny to talk about the Rural Assets Report, and then maybe we can come back to some of the other points in that. Danny.
Great, thank you, and thanks for having me. So the project Rural Assets Policy and Practice Insights from the Devolved Nations was a 2-year project funded by the British Academy and Nuffield Foundation. And the aim of the project was to understand the impacts of the actual processes of community asset acquisition on the empowerment, resilience and wellbeing of rural communities. Where a lot of research is focused on the outcomes, we wanted to look at the process itself, which is anecdotally long, clunky, complex. So we wanted to look at how policy and practice differs across every UK nation, what works and what doesn't work for rural communities, what are the specific barriers and facilitators for rural communities to actually engage in these processes, and what further support might be needed. So by assets, we specifically looked at land or buildings owned by public bodies, so councils, NHS, forestry, police, fire, those kind of relevant authorities. So today I'm just going to be talking about some of the key highlights in terms of the barriers for rural communities. So what we found was from rural communities, the drive to take on assets was predominantly to tackle youth out-migration, which was seen as a major issue in rural communities in Northern Ireland, and for opportunities for local socio-economic regeneration and development. And also there was an element of the transformation of assets that might have had a negative historical legacy related to the Troubles to transform them into something positive for communities. When we spoke to public authorities across Northern Ireland, they said that they were driven to dispose of surplus assets as part of the required government process. But public authorities themselves felt like they really wanted to do more for communities, but they were completely restricted by the current process. In terms of rural community engagement in the processes, the key barriers that we found were the youth out-migration. That was the very thing that they were trying to tackle, meant that there was often a depletion of skills and knowledge required to actually undertake these often complex and clunky processes. Coupled with existing volunteer burnout due to ageing populations, again leading to that lack of capacity and skills. So I'd say the key barrier for rural communities engaging in asset acquisition processes was public authority and government processes themselves. So processes across Northern Ireland were found to be inconsistent, complex, lengthy and cumbersome. There was found to be a lack of policy structure, guidance or accountability across government departments. There was found to be a lack of rights for communities and a lack of duties on public authorities, especially so in other nations, for example in Scotland and in England you have the community right to buy, community right to bid, things like that. A lack of clarity over who owns what was a huge issue and a lack of information available, like public registers of assets. One of the key things was the difficulty in authorities being able to dispose or transfer of assets for less than market value, and the inability of rural communities to be able to match private sector bids on assets that were deemed more desirable, which in turn left rural communities often with only the option to take on liability assets that nobody wanted to bid for. But coupled with a lack of capital funding to be able to actually renovate these premises, that was seen as really problematic. One of the key things was a lack of processes or tools for authorities to actually be able to recognise and measure social value, to be able to offer any discounts or priority to rural communities. Again, and because of that lack of capital funding available, I know Charlie touched upon the Community Ownership Fund, but he spoke about how it's perhaps no longer a thing in Northern Ireland, and there was a huge issue with the match funding that was needed for the Community Ownership Fund. So in conclusion, our evidence strongly showed a clear demand in Northern Ireland for capacity building for rural communities, for asset acquisition, to allow them to be able to tackle out-migration and to aid local socio-economic development through the acquisition of local assets. There was a need for standardised, streamlined and consistent asset acquisition processes at a local and national government level, but this was also to be able to create kind of clear guidance frameworks and like roadmaps, toolkits, which can't currently be produced effectively because it's so inconsistent across authorities. The introduction of formal legislative mechanisms was called upon, such as duties on public authorities, first rights of refusal, more rights for communities, including the right to buy. The introduction of strategic capital funding. Many people look to the Scottish Land Fund, which was actually seen as fundamental in Scotland to the expansion of community ownership. The introduction of standardised measurement tools for social value. And there was a big emphasis on learning from other nations. So in Scotland, obviously, they have the Community Empowerment Act Part 5, which offers the community right to buy. England are about to introduce the community right to buy. Wales is currently, they held a large public consultation, and they've set up a Senate Commission Task and Finish group to either introduce legislation or better frameworks and guidance. So that's currently in process at the moment. And that concludes the key findings, but you'll find more detail actually in the report itself.
Liam?
Okay. Well, I'm going to speak to you as I suppose you could say, a practitioner, somebody who's been through the mill with this. I live in Cushendall, and myself and a group of other individuals got together to try and improve or create employment in the area and to improve employability. And we were running a number of courses, and I think it was 2018 we had an opportunity to bid for the local PSNI station through DTNI, and I subsequently became a member of DTNI. We were very enthusiastic getting out on this journey, and we put an interest in, submitted an interest in the building. We didn't win in the first time around. Choice Housing beat us, but then they couldn't get the building to work, so they come back to us, and we eventually managed to obtain the building. Well, I'm a businessman. I've been in business for almost 50 years, and I never went through as frustrating a journey in my life. Even the culmination of it was when we had the Crown Solicitor transferring the building. They couldn't decide who was the owner of the building. Was it the police authority, or was it PSNI, or was it Crown Estates, or who was it? So I found the whole process extremely frustrating. I have a great committee working with me, and just to show you the effort that has to go in to get something like this over the line, we met every second Saturday since 2016, almost without fail. Our meetings, right enough, were just 1 hour long. but that was the effort that was required in order to get this over the line. We were fortunate in making an application to COF, Community Ownership Fund, and they awarded us £300,000. And of course the bottom line was you have to match fund it. So that was another hill to climb. And we did manage to match fund it. But the frustration of the whole process was such that I think if we hadn't been as committed as we were, we would have stopped 10% through, 20% through. The other problem with community groups is that they tend not to have any money. And in order to take an asset and even decide whether you're going to do anything with that asset or not, you need money. You probably need an architect to draw up a plan. You need a quantity surveyor to price it. We didn't have that money. But thankfully, DTNI had a very small amount of money. And it was very small, maybe £3,000 or £3,500. And that was the catalyst that kick-started the process for us. If we had not had that £3,500, we wouldn't have commenced the journey. So one of the asks that I would have of your committee is that there is some kind of a fund set up, administered through DTNI, to allow these processes to be kick-started. Some will fail, of course, because 1 in every 10 businesses or 2 in every 10 fail. But out of that, there will be 6 or 7 or 8, hopefully, that will actually survive. And I think it would be worth doing that. It would be worth taking that entrepreneurial step, if you like, to assist in that. Once we were awarded the funding through the Community Ownership Fund, it was actually very plain sailing. There was very little red tape, which I was amazed at, and the process was very friendly, and we have a very professional team in our organisation. The other thing is that we're all voluntary. So everything we do in the organisation, it's through volunteers, and that's not sustainable. And Danny mentioned burnout. Well, I think we're nearly suffering from burnout at the minute. In the south of Ireland, they have got something like 400 hot desking centres. And when they fund those hot desking centres, they fund revenue to allow those centres for the first 3 years. And any of you that have been in business, when you start a business, I guarantee you, and I know I've done it a few times, you'll not make a profit in the first year. You'll probably not make a profit in the second year, and you're very lucky if you make a profit in the third year. So by allowing community organisations to get a building, that's not enough. I think you have to fund revenue for the first 3 years to have a manager in there, and we've done that on a sporadic basis, if you like, by going round and robbing Peter to pay Paul, to fund a manager part-time, and that has made a vast difference. The other thing that the centre does is that it stops people driving from Cushendall to Belfast or to Derry or to Larne or wherever. And I know I've done that for over 40 years, driving to Derry and to Belfast and other places. And I worked out at one point in time that I spent a working week driving to and from work every month. That's forgetting about my carbon footprint as well. So these centres, I think, are really, really, they need to be there. And I'm going to ask your committee to use our centre. It's a rural area. There are lots of farmers in the area. I'm sure there are meetings that could be held in Cushendall that are held in Belfast. And I would ask you to bear that in mind and think about it. And at that, I'll stop and take questions.
Can I just maybe add to something that Liam said, just to give you a flavour of the broader sort of interest really across Northern Ireland. So Castlederg and Tom has an interest in this. The PSNI station there has been closed for several years. A number of community activists are pursuing the opportunity to acquire that and make a contribution to the regeneration of Castlederg. Loch Macquarie, Declan's territory, was successful in getting some resources from COF and an asset from council, and they do sterling work there in Tyrone as well. Brashane another police station, but also a mill, but also Millennium House in the centre of the village, all led by a voluntary committee with one employee as well. You've got Garrison, another success story from Community Ownership Fund. You've got Brookborough, who already own an asset, which is a railway station. They're looking for a railway yard. That's ongoing. You've got Cushendall. You've got Rathfryland. Do you know what I mean? Where you've got a community group which owns a former bank, which owns a number of housing units and is pursuing the former heritage building in the centre of the town. And you've got a boxing club which was successful through COF as well. So it's patchwork, it's broad, it's varied, it's sport, it's heritage, it's business spaces like Liam's, you know what I mean? But it's all being led, I suppose, like by community activists. In some instances, you're with organisations who do have a paid employee. In other instances, you do have like voluntary participation, very much like Grow the Glens, who are taking this work forward. And our own organisation, in responding to the budget from the Finance Minister last year, we made a call for what Liam has asked for as well. You know, we need development monies for organisations who want to be in this space. We need to have a resource to engage with that pipeline of organisations who are interested in advancing community ownership, and through community ownership making a contribution to physical renewal and regeneration, social and public services, economic development. And we've also then asked for, in that, a Northern Ireland Community Ownership Fund. You know, depending on what happens from Westminster, I think it's incumbent upon us in this House to be thinking about the value that the Community Ownership Fund has brought to Northern Ireland and what it is that an NI Community Ownership Fund might bring going forward in terms of like our broader sort of policy purposes around economic development. So there's that, and then Liam's point is well made. It is revenue. We can't throw many of these rural organisations and urban and peri-urban organisations to the wind when they do the hard graft in terms of identifying opportunities for their communities, whether it be public assets and or private assets, and then sort of have to then go out and leverage all of their own funding. So there is, for me, so it's an important consideration for the Executive and the Assembly to ask, well, if we're going to advance this agenda, how do we do that, and what sort of resources do we make available to our communities in that regard? Our advocacy is for community ownership. We believe communities have got the rights and should have rights of ownership. You do have rights of ownership in England to a lesser degree than you have in Scotland through the Community Empowerment Act. We have nothing here. We have nothing. We have a policy framework which recognises the potential of disposing of surplus public assets to community development organisations, social enterprises, but we don't have an enabling environment which allows that process to run smoothly. And we've been asking for several years now for the Assembly to consider and to debate the issues around the introduction of a legislative act with a number of provisions that will support and underpin that agenda and drive it further forward. And we would leave that ask with you today as a committee.
Thank you so much. It was really good. You must have practiced before you came in, did you? It was almost seamless. Thank you. It was really, really interesting, actually. I've a couple of questions, if that's okay, just to open up, and then I'll take other questions from members. The report states that the research shows a need for a standardised and streamlined asset acquisition process at both local and national government level, including the community right to buy. Could anyone then please expand on the community right to buy, perhaps by way of definition, or explain a little bit more on what type of assets that you're perhaps alluding to? A bit of an example or a list, if that's okay.
Well, I'll talk to it. So we don't have rights here. You've got legislative provisions which exist in England through the General Disposal Consent Order, which allow local authorities to dispose of assets up to a value of 1 point less than 2 million to communities should a business case be made. We've got a policy framework here which is aspirational, but it falls down largely because estates managers who are managing the disposal of our public estate are adhering to recommendations in the Northern Ireland Act that they get best value, and best value is determined to be the capital value of the asset, and it sort of falls down to that. Now, having said that, there are several examples under which assets have gone over to communities at less than best consideration, and by that we mean £1 or less than certainly the market value. But by and large, that's not the general rule of thumb as to how this works here. I suppose when we talk about the community right to buy, we sort of in part look to what's in play in Scotland that Danny has already alluded to. Maybe Danny can add to that in a minute, which is the Community Empowerment Act, which is a broader suite of provisions, and I think they're legislative provisions within planning. So when we think about place, and we think about how we develop places, and when we think about where communities, as we understand communities to be, sit within that, then what tools and resources, legislative tools and resources, do they have at their disposal to advance their agenda? They don't have anything. So they can't exercise the right to buy. They can't nominate a public asset and say, well, we've got an interest in that. And it's not simply a matter of putting your hand up and saying, we want that, we should get it. You know, there's a lot of factors that are very much dependent upon the success of that. But there's a need for legislation to drive that agenda forward. We think so anyhow. And we've been campaigning now for several years for the introduction of that here in the north of Ireland.
Okay.
Danny, do you want to maybe add the community parliament?
There's a piece on an example of assets to give us maybe a much more easy to understand of exactly what type of thing we're talking about.
So, for an example, so the Community Empowerment Act in Scotland, there's 8 parts to it. Part 5 is asset transfer, which is probably the biggest part of it. So the asset transfer policy in Scotland, it gives communities a right to request asset transfers from public authorities. So this can include full ownership, which is the right to buy, lease, management, stewardship, whatever shape or form. So in law, the relevant public authority must agree to a properly framed request unless there are reasonable grounds for refusing. The request must state the asset to which it relates, the reasons for making the request, the benefits which the community transfer body considers will arise, the price that the community would be prepared to pay. But the key thing is that the relevant authority is prohibited from selling the asset to anyone else until it considers the community request. So it's kind of like the community gets right of first refusal almost. But the big thing is that it's not just surplus assets. So in theory, the law states that you could, in theory, go for the local town hall if you could put up a better case than what it's been used for. So it's not just about those liability surplus assets, it's making sure that communities get access to actually decent assets as well. So under the Scots law as well, the community body can seek a review or appeal of their request, which then goes to ministers. So if the local authority turns around and says, for example, no, we're not willing to sell that to you because we're looking to get, 2 million and sell it to private developers, the community can come back on that because there are recognised social value measurement tools in Scotland which allow communities to build a case to say, actually, you need to look at the social impact as well as the financial gains. And in a lot of cases, it tends to fall on the side of the community.
And the other thing I'd add to that as well is currently, I think, being considered by the Labour Party in Westminster is the introduction of the community right to buy. So it's providing communities with that means to challenge landlocking or land banking by private developers in towns and villages as well. And again, we have nothing like that here.
Just to comment on that, so in England they currently have the right to bid, which our research found to be pretty redundant and weak and ineffective, because it's a similar situation where you're bidding against, you have the right to bid again, like alongside private sector bidders, and therefore it's hard to match those kind of values.
Very good. And imagine, I'm thinking of you mentioned the word liability, so the transfer of liability will obviously be one of those things. I imagine, you guys can answer, I'm imagining that the transfer of liability goes with the asset, but it's all obviously done on a basis of risk assessment on whether it's leased and a stewardship, whether it's sold, because I can imagine if the community group don't have the capacity, that's all done front-loaded, and they're not left say holding the baby when the bathwater's going type of thing.
No, well, they are left holding.
Yeah.
But my point being, I know some groups have fantastic capacity, fantastic individuals, and great ideas, and you need to net it all together. What is the safety net to ensure that a community group isn't?
Well, I suppose that's where we come in as an organisation. So we do what we can to work with organisations to make an assessment as to whether an organisation is fit, if I can use that term, to acquire an asset and progress with an asset. I mean, it's important for us to be able to sort of, professionally, to recommend to organisations you should not be moving forward on the basis of your governance is poor, your business plan is unsustainable. Do you know what I mean? You do not have the capacity and the capability to manage this in the longer term. That does not say that your aspiration and your intention around ownership and the contribution that'll make to your place shouldn't be recognised and supported. And that's a development space that we need to be in, but we don't really have a development programme for that at this minute in time. So that's sort of where we come into that. On the asset stuff, it's the disposal of surplus public assets and quite often they're at the end of shelf life. They have no meaningful purpose or use for the public body who's disposing of it, and quite frequently they are in a major state of disrepair. So you could call it liability transfer. But you have that energy and enthusiasm from within communities for place, do you know what I mean, and what place means to them. And assets are opportunities, I suppose, to revive places, to regenerate places, to create public services in places, to create employment in places. And so communities frequently step into that difficult space around acquiring these liabilities and looking at ways and means in which they can utilise those and transform them into assets for those communities. And I think Liam's case and point around Cushendall is well made. You know.
Yeah, the building in Cushendall had not been used since 2015. And I suppose to our benefit when we bought it, the building had been maintained internally, not externally. So its heating was running practically all the time. There was lights on in the building. Somebody visited it once a month and took a look in the door and went back out again. But that was costing the public purse quite a bit of money to do that. So when we tried to get it for less than best, well, we didn't. We got the district valuation on it, and that's what we paid at the end of the day, which I thought was a bit unfair, because we were taking a liability away from government effectively.
Yeah, and that's just an awareness piece from myself, if that's okay. And maybe come back towards the end. There's a few things beating about my head. I'm going to bring in the Vice Chair first of all, Declan.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation. And as you declared interest, a community group I'm involved with was successful in the Community Ownership Fund, and I fully identify what you've been talking about there in terms of the frustrations, and I think it's also challenging as well as the likes of the Community Ownership Fund. You're dealing across the water with it. You're not dealing here with your own. Like whenever we had leader groups here, for example, you're dealing with locally here, whereas, and like I felt you're at the whim of Westminster, including the time of the Westminster election. You know, so it was. I found that to be particularly challenging. Well, I was going to ask about the community right to buy, but you've addressed that there. One there, Danny, you mentioned the Scottish Land Fund.
Yeah.
It was key. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that Scottish Land Fund, please?
Yeah, so the Scottish Land Fund, it's grants of up to 95% of an asset's value. It's funded by the Scottish Government and delivered in partnership with the National Lottery Community Fund and the Highlands and Islands Enterprise. It's predominantly for communities of geography rather than communities of interest, which is one of its downfalls and something that they're looking to change. But yeah, that is the main source of capital funding for Scottish community asset transfers.
Can I just add as well, like we appreciate that the need to return capital to the centre is very important for the public sector. We do get that, you know what I mean? We're not always asking for surplus assets to come over to communities at less than best consideration, but we are asking for some sort of balance in terms of how we assess the potential value and return of those assets. And if the case is like you need to realise the value of it in community, if it's still an asset for you, then that's what you need to do. We're not saying it's one size fits all here. We're definitely not saying that. But if we're not considering the potential longer term economic return in terms of disposing of assets at less than best consideration, whatever that may be, then I think we're failing to take account of the opportunities and the value that our public infrastructure presents for place-based development and renewal and public service.
Just to come in on that as well, I think the point is as well with the legislation, using Scotland again as an example, it's not just about ownership, that's not the gold standard, it's about the flexibility of what works best for you. So the Act itself does actually cover lease, stewardship, management, all different types of things. So it might be that you're not quite ready for full ownership, but the Act can help you navigate getting a good lease. But I think going back on the kind of your point about making a case as well, the research did actually show that having standardised, consistent kind of guidance frameworks and stuff, and having a formal application form that was backed by legislation, it was good for due diligence. So communities weren't going in blind and they weren't wasting their time. So they could look at what was ahead of them and say, actually, I don't think we're ready. We're not going to go for this. Whereas communities had often failed or ran out of steam or burnt out getting through processes because they had no idea what was coming ahead and all the obstacles that they would face. So that was kind of one of the key values of having that standardised process.
Yeah, and in Northern Ireland as well, I mean, just back on Danny's point, like, ownership is everything from tenancy to title, and there's a lot of stuff in between there, do you know what I mean? So it's what works for the organisation. Many organisations want freehold and are quite large development trusts, and others are just term small leases, whatever, which work for them. You know, important to consider that.
That, and the other thing I was going to ask as well is where do you see this sitting? I find myself in this sphere of rural regeneration. I find myself ping-ponging between DFC and DAERA a lot, and we've seen some really good examples of them working together, like the small settlements scheme where the DFC and DAERA co-funded that there. But they're still two separate departments. So where would you see what you're asking for? Where do you see that sitting? And then just a second, just that's one thing. And then you said that councils felt restricted in some way or another. Could you just maybe elaborate on how exactly that? So it's two questions, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it's an executive priority, and I think because the public estate is held across all government departments, then obviously it applies to all government departments. But the way it operates here, obviously communities have the sort of policy brief for community ownership, and through the support they provide us, and we take that further forward. So rural affairs, I mean, we've spoken with civil servants in DAERA on this as well. We understand our role in this, but they don't have an investment stake in it. So I think that's a matter for the executive to resolve. You know what I mean? If we bring forward a legislative framework, you know what I mean, because we do recognise there's a value in community ownership in terms of what it delivers for public policy, then there's a question around, well, how does that relate then to the wider sort of public sector? So I mean, because the breadth and depth of services that are provided by communities, cover all policy areas, from health and social care to education to to leisure and economy. So there's that. On the council issue, the council issue is really one of sponsorship. The policy process says that third sector organisations who get to a point of transaction need to have a public sponsor. And sort of largely we approach councils to act as sponsor of that. And essentially that's just to use our compulsory purchase powers to allow the transaction to happen. There's no onus or responsibility on the council in terms of ownership or investment, but councils read it as if there is an onus of responsibility for ownership and investment upon them. And that's a real grey area, sort of trying to get them over that, So that's the difficulty in sponsorship, and that still sits within the policy framework. But as I understand it, the policy framework is to be reviewed in the incoming financial year, so that gives us an opportunity to look at some of the issues that exist there.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that we found was a kind of barrier for public authorities was that lack of social value measurement tools. So their inability to be able to look at the social value of what communities could bring and make a case for it. So it was not like they were against communities taking on these assets, but they just felt halted by their inability to demonstrate why they should back the community rather than a private developer per se. That was, I'd say, one of the key things, but also obvious things like kind of austerity related budgeting, resources, the need to look at finances and prioritise financial gain.
Yeah. Just a comment before I finish this. I just want to say I can fully identify the value of bringing an asset, the social value of bringing an asset into community ownership, and again, you mentioned Lochmacquarie, that's right from we brought the lake into community ownership, and John here can also declare an interest in his previous role working in land fisheries with that as well, who signed off the management agreement. But that has revolutionised community development in our community, and people feel so much value connected to that, but as a natural asset being brought into the community. And indeed the Minister was down on New Year's Eve this year, so he was Minister himself, and he took part in the last 5 runs, so it really has been a huge transformative impact on the community. So thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. No problem.
Okay, JB, you're up next, and then Anya.
Chair, thank you. Declan and Dr. Vice Chair, by the way, touched on some of the issues that I was going to raise, and there's been some clarification. Just to add what he said there at the end, I hope you can take away some reassurance today that there's some knowledge of it here. There's also an interest in it here, and also the fact that the committee, as a team, decided for this year we would pay a particular put a particular emphasis on the rural affairs aspect of DAERA, which hadn't always got the same attention publicly as the other divisions or directorates of that department. And I hope all of us continue to make progress on that. The other thing is, I can remember clearly, Liam, as a former police board member, the Cushendall Police Station journey. Mm-hmm. I remember making some contact with people on it as well, because even I, as a board member, was fascinated at how long this thing keeps appearing on the agenda and doesn't appear to be going anywhere. The Castlederg one came later and was probably still going when I departed the board. And I apologise that I couldn't influence in any big way the length of time it took, but I clearly remember trying to track the progress. Clearly, the coordination and capacity, I'm probably stating the obvious, but I want it clear for our own records today. Clearly, the coordination of processes is key in all of this. Now, acknowledging that there's likely to be a multitude of potential owners, both public and private, in any scenario here, and acknowledging also that it's not always going to be a simple process. I think the finding of a home is and where it sits is key, but that's for a later stage. Surely, and I'm keen to know more about this, surely councils have a key role in the capacity building as well, given that council community services departments across the board will be already involved and invested in capacity building for grant applications, of community grant applications, and a range of other facilities and assistances that are out there. Is that not a natural that, whether it's done initially by central government, that surely it should be rolled out as locally as possible, so A, the community can access it, and B, the people who know the issues best on the ground are delivering in the local area. So council on capacity, I think, and then coordination of processes and making the processes smoother at central government. Is that a fair analysis of it?
Yeah, I think that is, but it's not how it works. So, like, you know what I mean? It's not how it works, and I can't speak for council and the issues that exist within councils. Like, some councils are very, very supportive, recognise very clearly the contributions community organisations, social enterprises make to their own policy and development responsibilities at a local government area, like, and are very engaged and supportive. But they don't have a resource for this. They don't have a resource for it, but I think certainly it needs to form part of the conversation going forward.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly for us, it's, when we talk about, we're an advocate as a network for community ownership, so localism is really, really important to us, like whether that's in Cushendall or whether that's in Portaferry. Do you know what I mean? But those local places are part of a bigger local area, do you know what I mean, which councils obviously have responsibility for, and you're right, we need to find ways and means of connecting the micro local, the very local, with the local council areas as well. That's a piece of work to be done, do you know what I mean? In terms of the coordinating piece, I mean, the current coordination sort of really comes through the Department for Communities with the support of Land and Property Services Central Advisory Unit. And then we come into play as a charitable organisation ourselves, I suppose, in terms of that advocacy and representation of the third sector. So I think maybe from my own personal perspective, perhaps what's missing there, it goes back to Robbie's point, is the cross-departmental connection. So where do the rest of the central government departments sit in relation to the work that DFC and LPS are actually leading in terms of coordinating the policy? So that's probably a weakness, and maybe that will come up in the review of the policy framework this year. And maybe that's just something for the committee to be mindful of as well.
Very useful, thank you.
Thank you, John. Anya, are you able to pick up? Back to Anya. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I suppose my knowledge and my experience is that You're aware of that all public buildings and property was seen to get the highest possible value for that. So in essence, what you need are proposing legislation in place that gives community groups an opportunity before that goes in the public market. Is that in essence what you need?
Yeah, I mean, the current disposal process, when an asset is declared surplus by a public body, central government or an executive agency, is managed through Land and Property Services, and the first stage of that is it goes to the internal market, which is other public bodies and voluntary and community organisations. And it's that point, you know, if communities haven't already identified a redundant or derelict asset in their community, that, you know, we do some sort of marketing and promotion across the voluntary and community sector to see whether there's an appetite to take some of that forward, like, you know. But I do appreciate your point. I recognise your point around the, you know, the book value and the need to return that capital to the centre. That's really, really important. And I think we've sort of covered some of that here, but if I can use a case just to illustrate the return in another way. So Bangor Courthouse, not rural per se, went over for less than best consideration. It's an asset from the land, Courts and Tribunal Service was their asset, okay, under the Department of Justice. So went over for less than best. That organisation so far has managed to bring or accrue over £2 million of capital for the redevelopment of that asset. That asset is now open and providing arch-based services for Bangor. It's trading as a business, you know what I mean? So the value return, which we don't have a method for sort of assessing here, is absent. So we look at the sort of book value and we fail to consider the potential wider return. So an organisation like us bringing in millions, overaging the value of the asset itself, but using that monies as well then to consolidate and build their public service, their business as well. And the same is the case across Northern Ireland. If it's Portaferry, for example, you know, Portaferry Regeneration Group, who I think have an interest in the police station at the minute, it's to add to their wider portfolio of assets. If it's Rathfriland, for example, for the organisation that got the bank, who now wants the old meeting house in the centre, it's around, again, just adding to the regeneration of the area as well, you know. But the point is well made.
You back in about an hour or two, I'm just had a committee meeting here.
You just came on there, you just unmuted.
Places like banks could be owned privately, so there's a different scenario in that situation.
Very big one.
In that case, there are a number of assets that were bought by community organisations through the Community Ownership Fund. A lot of transaction stuff. So a lot of old public assets are bought privately, and then they're sat on. If they're not developed, then they just sat on. The police station in the top of the hill in Dungannon is a case in point. It was bought privately. An architect, I think, did some work to it, couldn't make it work, and then it sat there lying empty for a number of years. A local organisation bid for money and got the transaction, you know, and it now has that asset, it's a heritage asset. There's multiple examples of that, William, across Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Just to come in on that, I think the difference with rural communities as well, being able to take on assets, is that they're often used as multi-purpose spaces and they're tackling multiple different needs. You know, where in rural communities there's more risk of the withdrawal of services and facilities, the communities are then able to use these assets to really tailor what is actually needed in their community, like Liam, the youth out migration and being able to create a space for people to work from home and work within the community. So it's the need is slightly different and the social impact can be actually wider given these multi-use spaces.
Yeah, currently we're running education courses. Catalyst are providing entrepreneurship training. We have 3 own-door offices with 3 companies running in the village, and that just doesn't stop people driving to Belfast or wherever. Like I said earlier, they're going down the street and they're buying their sandwich at lunchtime. They're maybe going to the coffee shop or whatever. They're generating something within the village. They're bringing movement and livelihood to the place as well, yep, instead of having a derelict building. So, and we have physiotherapy, psychiatry, speech and language. We have a number of those therapies running in evenings during the week as well in the centre. So it's brought a lot of vibrancy to the area.
I mean, sensitive communities are intervening in spaces where the market is not there, do you know what I mean, or the public sector, or the public sector's preferred market developers are no longer interested in housing is an increasing one. For example, there we've got a number of rural development organisations who have housing units and seek to acquire property to respond to a housing crisis in their areas as well. And we have a separate report on that from Queen's as well, specifically looking at housing in a rural context.
Thank you. I see Anya's on there. William, if that's okay. Anya, do you want to try and unmute there, see if it'll work? He's not unmuting. We heard you slagging us off a couple of minutes ago, so you're all right. I'll see you on Monday in the chamber.
That's me now.
Here, you're on now. Go ahead.
I'm back on.
You're back on.
Yeah, look, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to cut the preamble and go straight to two questions that I have. Just in relation to the closure of the Community Ownership Fund, are you aware of any engagement that is or has been taking place with stakeholders like yourselves in order to establish what a new scheme might look like or funding stream?
Well, we're still engaged with our sister organisations in England, Scotland and Wales and the other support providers who are delivering support for community ownership in England, Scotland and Wales to consider whether there might be scope to... There is a campaign ongoing for, there's a call for a £1 billion fund for the UK. Let's see how that lands with the Labour government, you know what I mean? That would be to deliver that over 10 years. But outside of that, I mean, go back to Declan's point, we are campaigning here and we have been speaking to the Finance Committee and others with regards to the need for the executive to consider, well, what does an NI, Community Ownership Fund, look like? So, I mean, I gave some figures at the outset of this with regards to what we think is needed. You know, we're talking potentially at the minute based on like 120 groups, 35 million, you know, based on, 201 groups, which was the expression of interest we had. We're talking about a £70 million fund for the North, and that's capital, that's revenue, and that's development monies as well, and that would be delivered over a number of years. So we're actively campaigning for that. But we appreciate the difficulties that the executive finds itself in at the minute with regards to its own budget. But hey, it doesn't stop us trying to make the case for it, you know.
No, absolutely, and thanks for that. Thanks for that, Liam. It's great to see that work is ongoing at the minute, and you're knocking on, I suppose, all the right doors at the minute as well. Just in relation to training and post-acquisition support for those community groups, and for a lot of those rural groups in particular, would there be I suppose going forward, would there be the need to roll something along the lines of additional training, possibly posts for people to go into rural community groups and to give expert advice on all of those issues?
Absolutely. Yeah. As much as there's a need for pre-development support for organisations that have an aspiration to be in this space, you know, there's a need for a development programme there, but there is a need for post-acquisition development support as well. Now, we have some residual resource from the Community Ownership Fund that we're using to that end. But I suppose one of the things that we're trying to address as well is a development space. It's not consultant-led, that's people-led. And so therefore there are questions around capacity and capability and leadership, and where do we identify resources that will actually invest in a younger generation of people as leaders to take on some of these development challenges in their rural villages as well. So that's key going forward. Outside of the COF resource that we have, I mean, once that's spent down, you know, we've got some resources from DFC, but it doesn't cover sort of the broader demand that exists across the north of Ireland. There's potential, I think, in rural communities, you know, being part of the broader agenda in terms of wealth building, to make a case for resources to support them in terms of post-acquisition development as well. But we have to see how some of those arguments play out with other central government departments.
Thank you, Anya.
And that's thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, you okay there? I wasn't cutting you off. I just thought maybe you're okay. Okay, good.
No, that's me from it.
You'd soon tell me anyway. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. And Anya's really covered what I was going to ask, and that was that support sort of post-acquisition. But I suppose there is that fear for those community groups who don't have experience, and I know you've cited some even in my own constituency who've done extremely well, particularly in Portaferry, you know, but they have I suppose a wealth of knowledge, and I suppose they really don't have a certain amount of fear now because they've learned from mistakes as well as their successes, but I suppose it is about sort of getting into some of those sort of smaller groups who really have done very little other than trying to get a community festival together. But there are opportunities there, and I suppose there would be that fear of responsibility, obligation, particularly around that idea of being a trustee or a director. And then if it were to go wrong, where would they go then? So I suppose it's really, I'm looking really at Liam too, because you're fortunate having had that experience as an entrepreneur and so on, and a businessman. Not all groups have that.
We have been fortunate in that all of the people on our committee are professionally qualified, and they've all had a lot of business experience. However, and I've suggested this to Charlie and I've spoken about it in DTNI, there are a phenomenal number of people in Northern Ireland, probably around my age or maybe younger, who are retired, and they bring a wealth of experience in terms of their profession, but they're just retired and they're doing nothing. And I believe that if the right mechanism was in place, those people would be happy for very little remuneration to come back into, not into the workplace, but into a sort of a consultancy role to guide community groups. And I've spoken to a few people about this, and they would be prepared to do that. And it's something that I think could be put together fairly easily. And I think that would answer your question.
And just to come in on that as well, I think a model that we've seen a lot of success in Scotland is the Community Ownership Support Service, which was funded with the introduction of the Community Empowerment Act. So it's basically regional officers that cover specific regions. They go out and they offer support pre-acquisition in basically kind of helping community groups to navigate the process. They have like a roadmap, they have advice on business planning, they can offer money to get their own valuation done of a building, but it is that kind of like hand-holding communities, but also capacity building. But they don't only just do that, they offer at the minute they're trialling a hub and spoke model, so where you've got communities who've been through an asset transfer, they can be used as the hub, and then they can bring in other community organisations from that region to come in and learn from their experiences. But going back on what John said earlier about the actually training of local authorities as well, that is a role that the Community Ownership Support Service do. They hold training and workshops for local authority staff for them to be able to understand the processes and get them up to speed with all of the kind of administrative structures.
And we perform some of those functions, through the resource from DFC, but we're a small team, and we can't cover the demand that's out there. I know the cost. It's part of our sister organisation, Details, in Scotland, and something like that would be very welcome here in the north of Ireland. There's no doubt about that, But I do think when I think about rural places, and even think about urban places, I think about like succession planning, and think about the age profile of the people that are active in voluntary development spaces, and why are perhaps we not attracting enough young people into voluntary action for their places as well. And I think we need to think about the difficulty that presents all of our places going forward as well, and what do we need to do to identify and stimulate and catalyse the action of new, younger leaders in our towns and villages as well,
Yeah, we're up and running with the building completed and operational a year at the end of this month. And in that period, we have hosted, I think, 5 community groups who are coming to us to ask us, how did you get here? What was the process? And we're very willing to help. And I think all community groups have that sort of camaraderie, if you like, that they're really willing to do that.
Thank you. I've no doubt that there's going to be a lot of conversations about this over the next period of time. There's things buzzing about my head. I'm just thinking of a report this week about birth rates in Northern Ireland, and the fact that we're going to have an older community in the not too distant future. We talk about youth migration. Youth migration is not going to be the problem if we don't have enough. If we don't have a high enough birth rate, we're not going to have the blinking youth to worry about migration. But the needs of the community still need to be reflected. Just 2 points I want to finish on, if you don't mind. Yes, Nicola. Okay. Yes, I see you now. Come in now, and then I have 2 wee bits I just want to go to at the end. Thanks, Nicola. Sorry, guys. No, try it. Still difficulties? Yes.
Oh, there I am now. Sorry, thanks, Chair, and sorry for just trying to jump in there. And thank you for your presentation this morning. Really, really interesting. And I suppose coming from a rural constituency, it is obviously very important for myself and for Declan and Anya too, I suppose, representing rural areas. So I'm glad that this has been a priority for the committee. Liam, I actually wanted to ask you, you kind of touched upon it there now, about engagement with your innovation centre in Cushendall and other areas, and kind of what learning other groups have been able to get from the likes of yourselves. So you did mention that there. But as Robbie talked about, like one of the main drivers, I think Charlie said this in your open remarks, was about trying to slow down youth migration. And I wonder, Liam, if you could maybe give us examples of how the Cushendall hub has done that there.
Yeah, well, I suppose COVID had an effect on people coming back to the area, and we currently have one young company that the directors have come back. In fact, we have two now that I think about it. One that was based in England, and they have come back. They're utilising the centre. In fact, as a husband and wife team, they don't work together. They work with two separate companies, and they're both in the Innovation Centre. And then we have another young couple who have come back and are running their business from it as well. So that's two examples. The other thing that we did was we organised for Catalyst to come to the building, and we advertised a programme on entrepreneurship. And this will interest you in that we had 10 places, and the 10 places were filled with ladies. And there were no gentlemen applied, and that ran very successfully. And we're just talking to Catalyst at the minute about a follow-up programme on that. The other area that the hot desking, if you like, is used for, the Glens of Antrim obviously it's a very scenic area, and we have lots of holiday makers and lots of holiday homes. People are extending their time in the area because they can now. They don't have to work from their mobile home or a caravan or their holiday home or whatever. So we're almost inundated in July and August, and to a degree at Easter and Christmas as well this year. So that's given us the I suppose the spurt to. We're looking at phase 2 for the development, and we're in the growth deal for that development. One of the things that we will do is we'll look at quite an alteration, if you like, to the layout of the building. The building we have is a bunker. It's got concrete walls and concrete roof, even though it looks like a traditional building from the outside. So it was very difficult to really alter, but we've managed to do that. But our second phase to the building will be more small offices to facilitate startups.
That's really interesting, and I suppose that touched on the point you'd made as well about commuting and your commute to work, as you noticed from Cushendall to Belfast, wherever it was, and spending that long. Yeah. Like it's something, obviously, again, from a rural area that you are affected by. I noticed it obviously mostly travelling to Stormont. You know, the effect that there has on the carbon footprint and all that there too. So I suppose that ties into it. But no, listen, I just want to thank you for coming along here today. I think what Anya and Michelle talked about there, about the training and making sure people are aware of you know, the funds available and the opportunities available to community groups is really, really key, and to have that there learning from others who've been there. So it's very useful to have you here presenting, and hopefully we can get the word out and support you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You see, there's a huge interest in the committee. Just my final 2 points, and I did remember them. Sometimes I forget. I have these great ideas and then I forget. So the first one was in around, Danny, you talked about lack of social value measurement tools, and I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers, because I can see theoretically how, if this worked properly, it would be easy because it would fit in with any government's executives programme for government, looking at things like loneliness, mental health, educational opportunities and so on. So if there's anything that you could ever share in regards to the development or the further study of where those are being developed. And then the final one, and I see your hand up, Charlie, but the last one, and please don't do this. I'm not asking you to do a league table of our local councils, but I suspect, like everything in planning, there's a different approach probably in every council. I know that I've been involved in a couple in Lisburn and Castlereagh of really excellent opportunity. I can see the council mobilising in the right way to try and look at the opportunities, but also calculate the risks. Is there a disparity in regard to council performance? And if that's the case, then maybe that's one of the reasons then to legislate.
I can speak on that, Chair, if you like. We were given a certain amount of money from Community Ownership Fund and from the Department for Communities, and we were given a timeline that we had to spend it in, which was impossible. And we had to get planning within that period. And Causeway Coast and Glens, who don't get very good publicity in relation to planning, bent over backwards. In fact, they put us at the head of the queue because they knew we were a community, a voluntary organisation, and because we had money to spend in a specific period of time, and they really opened the doors for us.
Thank you.
So praise where praise is due, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And just on the point of councils, and this is not to disparage councils, but I do have a figures for distribution of the COF fund, and I can send that on for anybody that wants to read it. But it's a fairly even sort of across the piece. So some did obviously better than others. But we were campaigning at an earlier point in time for councils to work with civic organisations in terms of the opportunities that the Levelling Up Fund presented for capital development in places as well. So 120 million came to Northern Ireland, through the Levelling Up rounds 1 and 2. And I think back to your point, so it's incumbent upon ourselves, I think, on all of us to find ways and means for councils who are doing larger scale area-based regeneration to, do some horizon scanning and recognise where civic organisations are at in their constituencies and find ways and means of bringing them into play in terms of their development stuff. On the social value toolkit, we're currently doing a piece of work with the SIB. And we've commissioned a professor from Edinburgh to work with us to develop a social value toolkit. So we've got a number of case studies in that we want to go through to illustrate what we mean by everything we've been talking about. So one of those that we've put forward is Lindsay Hall in Loughry College. It's the Dara asset. It's a very large building itself, and it's a complex thing. There's some land in it. So we keep you abreast of how we progress on that, and the point of doing that is to say, how do we do this with something like Lindsay Hall, which potentially has a reasonable book value, but is a very difficult asset to develop, is a very difficult asset to get rid of, simply because of its connection with Loughry as a space. So we hope to have at some point in this year our own social value measurement framework. So we'll keep you informed about that.
Thank you so much. That's it.
My apologies for being late. There was a couple of incidents locally that I had to attend to there. So I wouldn't mind catching up with you at some other stage, maybe individually, if that's all right. Yep. Because I've read through some of the issues in your report there, and I would like to follow up on them, please. That would be great. Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Reach out to you.
Ian, Chair, and again, my apologies for being late. There's just on before Patsy there. But I did have the opportunity of visiting down at your innovative centre down there in Cushendall back maybe 9 months ago or so, sometime around that. And I want to commend you for the work that you has done. And I was looking at how that can be rolled out into other constituencies, into other rural areas that can benefit them and benefit the communities there as well, because it is a model that's worth of any community looking at and to take good practice from and follow on from, because it is an excellent development.
Thank you.
So the ayes have it, I think. In that regard, I think what I'm going to suggest, if the committee are mind, I think there's certainly enough interest in this that we perhaps task Raise with developing a little bit of a paper in regard to the discussion, some of the questions that have raised today, just and to see, because obviously the land has shifted a little bit with the loss of the community fund. Charles?
I suppose I have one ask, obviously we ask that you reflect on the report itself, the conclusions and the recommendations therein and their value to the work of the committee in terms of its critiquing of the policy framework for rural affairs in the north of Ireland. So there's that. And then the second ask, I suppose, is to see whether can we get this raised for debate in the Assembly proper. Can the DAERA committee, I suppose, consider whether we raise an issue around is legislation, is finance a key issue in terms of driving this agenda forward? I think a debate amongst members would be really, really valuable in moving this further forward.
Certainly we could, I suppose what will happen is off the back of the Raise paper, that'll give us, we'll come back to that then as a committee, having looked at the research by the Assembly researchers, and then at that stage then we can certainly consider it as an option for a committee motion, which would be, I think, a very useful debate. Thank you. You turned one ask into two. You're a shark. Just, I don't know if you've been called a shark that day, but you're definitely a shark. Right man for the job, maybe.
I'll take that.
Okay.
Thanks very much for your time. Thank you all.
Thanks for your time. Thank you. Okay, members. Agenda item 6 is an oral briefing from the department on farm support and development programmes. That's at agenda item 7, and we're going to be discussing SL1, the Farm Sustainability Transitional Provision Regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. And with your agreement, we're going to take the next 2 agenda items together as they are related, members. I refer you to pages 66 to 71 of the pack for the briefing paper from the department on the Farm Support and Development Programme, pages 72 to 94 for the SL1, the Farm Sustainability Transitional Provision Regulations Northern Ireland 2025, and the pages 7 to 13 of the tabled papers. So you'll be flicking through, members, for the Minister's written statement and update on Dara's new programme of farm support. Members, the Department's new Farm Support and Development Programme is being co-designed with the Northern Ireland agricultural industry and other main food and environmental stakeholders. DAERA states that the programme is fundamental to helping support farmers and collectively achieve environmental and climate change goals, providing the right support and policies to achieve both economic and environmental sustainability. It includes the Beef Sustainability Package, the Suckler Cow Scheme and the Farming with Nature Package. Members, the Minister intends to issue a further written statement to the Assembly at the end of the month to outline his plans for communications in relation to the programme. Regarding the SL1, this replaces the Farm Sustainability Transitional Payment, Transitional Provisions Regulations presented to the Committee on the 23rd of May 2024. On that date, we received a briefing from the officials regarding the Farm Sustainability Payment replacing the Basic Payment Scheme, which was phased in over a 2-year period, commencing with the Farm Sustainability Transitional Payments in 2025 and the full Farm Sustainability Payment in 2026. Members, the Department now intends to make a statutory rule to provide DAERA with the legal powers to implement that Farm Sustainability Transitional Payment, FSTP. They will also make a number of additional legislative changes to ensure the continued smooth rollout of the Farm Support and Development Programme. Rule will be laid before the Assembly under the draft affirmative resolution procedure, which ensures there's a bit of a debate. Members, I welcome the following officials to brief the Committee on the Farm Support and Development Programme and then to cover the SL1, the Farm Sustainability Transitional Provision Regulations, if that's okay. And I would ask the officials then to take, I'm sure you will, take any questions. You'll be well used to that after the briefing. So we have Dr. Rosemary Agnew, Director of Agricultural Policy, welcome. George Moffat, Deputy Director of Agricultural Policy, welcome. I've got it right. And yes, and Manus McHenry, Deputy Director of Agricultural Policy, you're also welcome. Thank you very much and feel free to brief the Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present on the 2 subjects you mentioned this morning. And I think, as you mentioned, Chair, I'm joined today by Deputy Directors of Agricultural Policy Division, George Moffat and Manus McHenry, and we will seek to answer any questions members have following this short presentation. So, members, you've already been provided, and I think Chair's taken you through some of the background, a written briefing on the programme and the legislation, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. Further to the written briefing to the Committee, for this meeting, Chair, you will have received a copy of the written statement Minister Muir issued to the Assembly yesterday, outlining his communication plans for the programme. At the outset, I want to draw your attention that the Minister has decided that the programme will now be referred to as a Sustainable Agriculture Programme moving forward. And this is to clearly relay its importance in supporting change for a sustainable future and the key role that it will play in delivering his priorities. Quite importantly, the Executive's decision to formally treat the resource DEL that has been baselined in the Northern Ireland Block Grant as Executive earmarked for 2025-26 and future years as part of its draft budget was announced on the 19th of December, and this is a significant and positive step forward. Northern Ireland is the only devolved region in the UK so far to have secured a proposal from its local executive to earmark the agricultural support budget, and this will provide assurance to farm businesses in the coming years that their counterparts in Scotland, Wales currently do not have, but it also helps maintain, importantly, our competitive trading position for the agri-food industry. It also means that as a department and as taxpayers, we will have to show to our taxpayers and to the executive that we can deliver change and value for money against this commitment of funding. While the draft budget is still undergoing consultation, the positive announcement on the 19th of December provided the basis for DAERA to move forward with plans to roll out the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. Minister has now agreed the timeline for the rollout of the schemes of the programme over the next 2 years, and this will be available on the Department's website in coming days. As you indicated, Chair, the Sustainable Agriculture Programme has been co-designed with key agriculture and environmental stakeholders, and just outside we were discussing that work actually commenced way back in 2018 and has been ongoing since that date. The Sustainable Agriculture Programme encompasses, as you mentioned, a wide range of schemes that were outlined in the Minister's statement, and I won't name all of them, but there are a range of schemes, firstly to support and assist farm businesses, such as the knowledge and the innovation schemes. Others that will serve as data platforms to provide important information to help farm businesses as they move forward, such as the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, the Bovine Genetics Project and the Carbon Footprinting Project. And in addition, others that will provide incentives or payments through schemes for the Farm Sustainability Payment, Beef Sustainability Package, Farming with Nature Package, etc. Information on all of the schemes will become available on the DAERA website in the coming weeks and will be updated on a regular basis. The committee will also receive briefings on the individual schemes as we move forward, and a number of these are already in your forward work programme. A series of awareness events are planned to take place at a range of venues across Northern Ireland in February and March, and these events will raise the awareness around the programme, its scheme details and the benefits to farm businesses, and really to encourage uptake of those schemes as we move forward. There are also plans to issue the first edition of a Sustainable Agriculture Programme newsletter in hard copy to farm businesses in Northern Ireland to serve as a helpful information reference resource for the programme, and this will be issued, we hope, by the end of March. Obviously, from the Department's point of view, the Sustainable Agriculture Programme is fundamental in helping DAERA support farm businesses, and it enables us to collectively achieve our environmental climate change goals, providing support and policies to help move forward on a journey of change that ensures both economic and environmental sustainability. I would seek your support in encouraging farm businesses to engage with the planned programme of communications and to avail of the information provided. So that probably brings me to the end of what I want to say broadly about the programme, Chair, and with your agreement, I'll just say something quickly around the regulations and the SL1.
That'd be good, yeah, thank you.
So the regulations are intended to give DAERA the legal powers, as Chair indicated, to introduce the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment. But they also include a number of more general provisions intended to support the rollout of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. As Chair said, it's a draft affirmative SR that we're bringing forward, and the SL1 for the regulations replaces the original Farm Sustainability Transition Payment SL1, which was discussed at this committee in May 2024. It has really been revised to reflect the up-to-date policy decisions, taking on board some of the views of the committee and now in respect of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. Just by way of background, a consultation exercise on the proposals that now make up the Sustainable Agriculture Programme was undertaken in late 2021. The responses informed 54 policy decisions that were announced in March 2022, and a number of these decisions relate to the establishment of a resilience payment, which we're now calling the Farm Sustainability Payment. In 2025, the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment is expected to attract applications from some 24,000 farm businesses. It will replace the basic payment scheme and will provide a vital safety net for farm businesses. It's also part of the important transition to the Farm Sustainability Payment in 2026. A further statutory rule via the draft affirmative procedure will be required to introduce the Farm Sustainability Payment from the 1st of January 2026, and this will be brought forward to the committee in due course. But to ensure that in 2026 the Farm Sustainability Payment, when introduced, is directed towards farm businesses actively engaged in agricultural activity, the SR before you today and the SL1 legislates or proposes to legislate that farm businesses that did not meet specific agricultural production levels during a historic reference period set by DERA as 2020 and 2021 will not be eligible. And we did discuss that at the meeting of the committee in May. This historic years requirement will not apply to applicants who have set up new farm businesses in any year following 2021. The Department will communicate with those farm businesses potentially impacted by this policy change during 2025 to enable them to plan effectively. Those who did not carry out the necessary agricultural activities during the historic reference period will be able to transfer their entitlements, and it will give them an opportunity, should they choose to do so, by the closure of the trading window in 2026. Entitlements not transferred by this date will expire. In the transition to farm sustainability payments, if entitlements were leased prior to the 1st of January 2025 on a long-term lease beyond the 15th of May 2026, they will remain with the leaseholder until the end of the lease, at which stage they will revert back to the lessor only if they remain eligible for the farm sustainability payment. If the lessor is not eligible for FSP, they will expire. We understand that doesn't impact an awful lot of businesses. Entitlement leases agreed during 2025 or 2026 scheme year entitlement trading periods will be limited to 1 year only by this SR. Applicants for the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment in 2025 will need to activate 3 entitlements on 3 hectares of eligible land to meet the requirements of the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment and, moving forward, the Farm Sustainability Payment in 2026. Currently, farm businesses in receipt of the Basic Payment Scheme or in 2024 must be actively engaged in agricultural activity and must meet the active farmer definition. This will continue in 2025 and 2026 and further years. The active farmer definition was removed from legislation by the rules for the Direct Payments to Farmers Amendment Regulations in 2020 as the provision was spent, given that it related to the establishment of entitlements in 2015. However, the recital containing the provision remains and it continues to be applied by DERA. So for legal certainty, it's desirable to express this in legislation. So these regulations before you today reinstate the active farmer definition in law. The regulations also introduce a number of additional changes and policies to enable the continued rollout of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. Regulations remove the reference to the total ceiling for Northern Ireland from Regulation EU number 1307/2013 of the European Parliament and Council of the 17th of December 2013, now in UK assimilated law, and allows DERA to determine the budget for each scheme year prior to the commencement of payments. The regulations remove the requirement for DERA to publish this ceiling and also provide the power to DERA to make additional payments to Basic Payment Scheme, Farm Sustainability Transition Payment or Farm Sustainability Payment eligible farm businesses in a scheme year if required. This provides flexibility for the Department to direct funding to other important areas of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme, but it also provides a mechanism to enable the Department to ensure that farm businesses benefit from the full agricultural support budget. The Regional Reserve and the Young Farmers Payment were introduced as compulsory schemes for EU member states to implement as part of the 2015 CAP reforms to encourage generational renewal within the agricultural industry. The regulations, again before you today, establish that 2025 will be the final year for new applications to the Young Farmers Payment, but successful applicants to the Young Farmers Payment in 2025 will receive the Young Farmers Payment top-up for 5 years, as is currently the case. 2025 will also be the final year that new entrants and young farmers can obtain entitlements from the Regional Reserve, but it is important to stress that new entrants and young farmers are not excluded from the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment or the Farm Sustainability Payment and retain the right to buy or lease entitlements to allow them to access payments. As we move forward, the Farming for Generations scheme, included within the Sustainable Agriculture Programme, will be the policy instrument to support generational renewal. This new scheme, rather than focusing on purely financial incentives, is designed to take a holistic approach to generational renewal, which supports the intergenerational needs of the farm family. Chair and members, I hope you found this overview helpful, and we're very happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much. There's quite a bit there, actually. So there is. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions coming from that. There's one that just occurred to me in regard to, and I know it's welcomed. You mentioned it, and I know that this committee was pleased with it. In last year, the Finance Minister, in cooperation with the Minister, then did actually baseline the resource deal and to treat it as executive earmark. But I imagine with the work that now needs to be undertaken, some of that's at risk because if it's not spent, it gets returned to HM Treasury. Has the department done any work in regard to the assessment of the level of that risk at the moment, and does it anticipate that there will be as close to a nil return as we can get, if not a guarantee of a nil return?
We are working through in terms of how we move forward with the budget and the various schemes that would be spent on, and obviously there will be budget requirements for each of the schemes. But remember, the schemes are voluntary, so it's about encouraging the uptake to ensure the money flows to farm businesses and spends out the budget. But one of the powers that we're seeking to take within the regulation is to ensure that we have the flexibility to spend out. And one of the last regulations that I mentioned around taking the power to make additional payments, should we need to ensure that the funding is spent out, is what we want to take forward today, or what we're discussing with you today as part of the draft affirmative regulation. So yes, there is a risk, but we are doing everything that we can to try to mitigate that risk.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you perhaps expand on how the programme will assist in particular with the development of an effective functioning supply chain?
Yes, absolutely. Just bear with me 1 second. This is one of, probably in terms of the 4 objectives of the programme, or the 4 outcomes we're seeking to achieve the programme, the working of the effective functioning supply chain is slightly behind the others, but we have been developing a 3-tier model of support for supply chains as part of the programme, and under this model different levels of support would be provided for businesses that are in the early stage of collaboration, startup schemes, those that require further collaboration and measures to scale up, and those that require innovative strategic collaborative measures in terms of the challenges. And as we move forward, there will be a separate briefing to the committee on the details of those supply chain schemes, but they're certainly not as well advanced at this stage as many of the other schemes are. The policy proposals for a strategic pilot are being developed, and I would envisage those will come forward in due course to this committee for discussion.
Okay. I noticed that in the papers it's noted that the beef carbon reduction scheme is already delivering emission reductions above what was projected in year 1. I don't know if you do, but have you any detail on the reasons, particular reasons why there has been the success in that project? Obviously, because I know the whole policy's deeply aligned to our climate ambitions.
And just another comment, if I can, around an effective functioning supply chain. Obviously, consumers are very much wanting to ensure that there are credentials associated to their food and there's a sustainable supply chain. So whilst I've focused in my answer to your earlier question around supply chain measures specifically, it cuts across into others, and beef carbon reduction is one of those. So it was launched on the 1st of January 2024 to incentivise a reduction in carbon footprint of finished beef cattle. In the first year of the scheme, at this stage, and I'm going to give you sort of rounded numbers, around 8,200 businesses have applied and appear to be eligible for the scheme. Potential numbers of eligible cattle are around 296,000, and that the budget for that will be about 19.8 million. Now, we're still finalising those figures, but to give the committee an indication of what those are. So From our perspective, in terms of the percentage of cattle that we expected to come in, we've hit our targets, or we hit very close to our targets in the first year. So we're seeing a reduction in the emissions from cattle. And as we move forward now from the 1st of January 2025, age at slaughter to receive a payment is 28 months, and it will reduce over the next couple of years. That will help reduce, and it's certainly one of the key policy tools that will come to the committee as part of the agriculture sector climate action plan.
Do you mind if I don't know if you have this detail? Has there been any feedback from farmers in regards to the drive to finish their cattle at 28 months? Is there any challenges, known or unknown, or unexpected maybe?
Probably the challenge that we get most is that it requires a lot of additional concentrate feeding in the last few months in order to finish this. But the technical information that we provide through CAFRE indicates it's the management of those animals through their lifetime that enables you to finish them at 28 months. It's not with minimal concentrate or lower concentrate inputs. It's not about putting lots of concentrate in at the end of their lifetime. And I think, that's probably the main comment that we've had. I think there is quite a recognition in the farming sector that this is a tool which will help meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets and is demonstrating to meet them, and there are less attractive alternatives to farm businesses based on the CCC's advice.
And my final one before bringing in the Vice Chair is just in line with the last question that we're on. I think the public would think that farmers are very much interested in the final value, but it is about the animal welfare piece that they're very interested in. Do you believe that there is a good communication setup between the learning that we're getting? Give an example, perhaps of even the one that we've just spoke about. That there is a good line of communication between our farmers and the department, so that we don't lose the good of what we're doing, we keep the ambition firmly focused, but also that if there are comments coming back from the operations, that they're taken on board by the department. Do you think that's happening?
I think Minister's statement yesterday indicated that we're going to start quite an extensive communications programme to get information and knowledge out, and I think the committee towards the end of June had a presentation last year on the plans around the launch of some of that communication package, that knowledge, that information and the accessibility of it. So we can always improve, and I think what Minister did yesterday was announce the beginning of a communications plan to try to ensure that there were better channels where information could flow around how to enhance your productivity, improve your environmental sustainability, improve your animal health and welfare, etc., etc. We can always improve, and we're very, very keen if the committee has any particular issues that they want to forward to us to look at them.
Thank you very much.
And we'll
Thank you.
address those.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Rosemary. Some good things. Obviously, it's good that we're one of the only regions that have our budget earmarked to give a bit of assurance. And it's good also that the department is going out to communicate this awareness amongst the farming and wider rural community as well. There's a couple of questions. There's definitely one that I would consider a bit of a red flag. This one here of number 13 of where you are planning to end the entitlements for new entrants. I think that there will have the impact of deterring a new couple or a new person wanting to start farming, because if that's the case, a farmer who they are then beholden or at the mercy of another person who's leasing those entitlements to them, and I think that actually would cut across. The average age of farmers here in the north is 59, and I think that for many farmers I've met, the opportunity to get their own entitlements and indeed the young farmer scheme is probably the best opportunity for young farmers, and I really do believe that this is not a good idea, effectively removing new entrants from the new payment regime.
Would probably suggest to you, Declan, we're not removing young people. We have a Farming for Generations scheme as part of the programme. The pilot has already started. That will help inform a fuller programme. If we go back to Regional Reserve and Young Farmers, that is a legacy scheme from the EU that was implemented in Northern Ireland in 2015. The EU has moved on from that. It is no longer mandatory to have a Young Farmers payment within the EU mechanism, within the overall CAP mechanism. And what we have done within the department is look at, is there a way in which we could have a policy instrument and schemes that, rather than focusing purely on financial incentives, they give a much more holistic approach to generational renewal. It's too early at this stage to say, but it could well be that support is part of that package, and that support is given in a way that allows a young farmer or a new entrant to buy entitlements if that's what they wish to do, to develop a farm. It's not confining it to that. Any initial reviews that we have done do not demonstrate value for money from Regional Reserve and new entrants and Young Farmers payment. And you will see very clearly that as we move forward, we need to ensure that we deliver value for money. So we're trying to move forward. We're not removing support for farming for generations, for new entrants, but we're removing an old EU legacy schemes.
I'll use an example then. So entitlements are being carried over into the new regime. So just explain, so if a young couple who hasn't been involved in farming before, who buys 50 acres of land and wants to get entitlements, how do they get those entitlements?
As of today, they either lease them or they have to buy them. Would the department support them in terms of leasing them or buying them? We're working through that. That will come to you in a separate discussion. It could be via a different mechanism rather than the current mechanism. But we wanted to provide clarity to everyone out there in the regulation that the Young Farmers payment would cease for applications in 2025 and that the Regional Reserve would cease for applications in 2025. The number of businesses who have obtained entitlements, I don't have the figures with me, but we can certainly provide them to the committee on the new entrant category, is very, very small.
And just final point, Chair, this one, lease or buy. So really what you're saying is that the only way a new entrant can get entitlements is to lease or buy them off a farmer who either doesn't need them or doesn't want them. I don't see how that is the best way. Effectively, the farmer who needs to lease them or doesn't want them, though they should be encouraged to. I just think a young person with no farming background starting out could have their own chance, and that's just a view, certainly a view that I have.
Okay, we'll note that, and we'll certainly provide to the committee the figures of the numbers who are successful in the new entrant category over this past 7 years, but it's very small, and it's on that basis.
Yeah, so just for clarity, the department would basically be saying it's a very small uptake at the moment, and it's seeking to close that. Mm-hmm. This was something that was put in 2015, I think, under the EU legislation, which no longer exists and hasn't been picked up elsewhere. Okay,
it's maybe because the numbers are so small, it strengthens the case not to change it.
Well, it's a reasonable argument, to be fair.
The other thing was the historic reference period during 2021. And been actively farming in that time. Obviously that was like right during the lockdown and the COVID era, and how will the department decide whether a farmer was actively farming or not active? What's the threshold? And bear in mind that we were at a very very unusual period of time that time as well.
In answer, I'm going to pass across to George to give you the detail, but it is all within the draft affirmative SR that is, I think, in your papers today. The detail of how we will do that, we're wanting to put in legislation, just to be absolutely clear, so that we provide transparency around how we're making those decisions. But I'll pass to George and he'll give you a little bit more background.
Yeah, so for the historic years exercise, we've effectively taken 2020 and 2021 as the 2 years that we're looking back at, and we're looking at farm businesses at that time in terms of the livestock that they had on the farm, the activities that they undertook at the farm. So we're very much using data held by the department, be that on APHIS or other data linked to poultry, pigs held on the farm. We've gone through that data in a lot of detail, and we've identified that there are just over 1,900 that will be impacted by this historic year's exercise. Those are businesses that didn't undertake any of the defined agricultural activities during the 2020 and 21 years. There's a further 500 businesses, just over 500 businesses, who leased out all their entitlements during that time period, and they would fall into that category as well.
Just before we move on to Michelle, am I correct in saying that one of the areas that was out for consultation that the Minister considered, I think it's at 3D, was, so it's in here as have farmed at least 3 hectares, but they were looking at 5 hectares, isn't that right? Yeah. So that's been, which is...
And originally, whenever we came to the committee chair in May, we were proposing 5 hectares. The committee wrote back to Minister, and Ministers considered that, and Ministers now decided that that would remain at 3 hectares.
And you had read it somewhere. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. And I have a number of issues, if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me. Like Declan, I had a concern with regards to, I suppose, some of the phrasing within the paper that we received, particularly around young farmers, and the fact under equality impact, I suppose you recognise that this was an area, a cohort which we're going to be their greatest impact was going to be on. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about the pilot and how you see that as being sufficient mitigations for what's being removed?
Thanks, Michelle. Rural Support were awarded the contract to deliver the Farming with Generations pilot. I think you would have seen that in the press. And it commenced with the delivery of a series of awareness sessions, 8 face-to-face meetings and 2 online sessions. The awareness sessions included an introduction to the scheme and input from both financial and legal professionals. And if you remember back to what I said, this scheme is about focusing not solely on financial incentives, but rather a holistic approach to generational renewal. So it's intergenerational. It's looking at the younger generation, the older generation, anybody involved in working on the farm. In terms of the awareness sessions, over 350 individuals attended the awareness events, representing about 250 farming families. The events did include an opportunity to ask questions, which demonstrated that farm families are grappling with a wide range of complex issues, including the inheritance tax changes that were announced in the recent budget. To date, 110 farm families have expressed an interest in the next stage of the pilot scheme, which is planning for succession, and the farm families will be supported in completing a farm business review, agreeing a succession plan, and determining the development needs of the successor. To achieve this, the farm family need to take part, obviously, in workshops and receive around 20 hours of professional mentoring support. So the elements of the scheme are preparing the successor, leading succession, and then farming in partnerships, really to try and link business owners without successors to new entrants. And perhaps this helps address some of Declan's queries earlier, who have limited or no farming assets. So all of that is within this Farming for Generations pilot. And that pilot will then inform a fuller scheme planned to open around 2026.
So how long?
So there shouldn't be a gap, is where I'm coming, in terms of support for young farmers or new entrants moving forward if they avail of the Farming for Generations scheme.
I think, Chair, perhaps even just for our own sort of due diligence around all of this, I think it would be useful maybe to hear from Farmers Union and maybe young farmers around the scheme. And obviously probably some of the broader issues that are even contained within what's being proposed here today. But moving on then to the Farming with Nature, and I know that the Minister has said that this is going to be one of his top priorities. I'm curious as to how this is going to be funded going forward, and the budget that's going to be used to fund it. I suppose my understanding with regards to the development of this programme is that it was going to be sort of nearly voluntary. But I'm curious, given where it's sitting now within the presentation, whether or not then it will be linked to SAP.
If I can, Chair, just on your last comment in relation to generational renewal, Michelle, the recommendations went to the Minister, were supported by the Agricultural Policy Stakeholder Group in terms of closing the Young Farmers Payment for applications this year and closing the Regional Reserve, and that does include representatives of the UFU, Young Farmers, etc. And they've been very positive about the opportunities for the Farming with Generation scheme. So I just want to relay that to members. To come back to your question, how will Farming with Nature be funded? And then I'll pass across to Manus and he'll give you a little bit more detail around the scheme. Farming with Nature will require both capital funding and resource funding out of the department's budget. The resource funding is contained within the earmarked part. The capital is a separate budget line. In terms of the Farming with Nature resource line, where will it come from? It will come out of that earmarked budget that we have as Resource Dale. We've always been very clear from the beginning of communicating that we will redirect funding from FSP to other measures as they come online. Now, we have not worked through what this actually means in practice in terms of budget lines, etc., but Farming with Nature will be funded from two budget lines. Initially, and Manus will take you through this, much of it is around capital in terms of the support that's being planned, so it will come from a separate budget line. But Manus, you just want to give a little bit of a flavour for Farming with Nature?
Yep, thanks Rosemary. In relation to the package itself, the plan is to open in 2025 the Farming with Nature package and will be phased in at various stages, the first of which will be the transition scheme, which the Minister will plan to launch at Balmoral Show this year, and will consist of a series of actions that all farmers will be entitled to apply into, and it will include measures such as planting new hedgerow, retention of winter stubble, repairing buffer zones, that type of work. Thereafter then we plan to open a group project later this year in relation to landscapes, which will be looking at collaboration between farmers with the opportunity to engage across a larger area where farmers can come together and focus on particular types of work that will improve or head towards environmental improvement. And the focus really in this first phase of the scheme will be around biodiversity and habitat connectivity, and really has come from where the Minister sees the Farming with Nature package going.
Yeah, so but just to be clear, just with regards to the budget, it's not linked to the SAP payment scheme, is it? It'll be
it will be part of the sustain. It is part, and it is Minister's key priority within the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. But is it linked to the farm sustainability payment? Is perhaps your question?
Yes.
Not at the minute. No.
Not at the minute.
No.
Okay.
No, and that's not within the plans. The only link it may have is it may require budget from the farm sustainability payment, resource budget from the farm sustainability payment as we move forward. But in terms of conditionality, and I think that's where you're taking me,
yes, I am.
In terms of conditionality for the farm sustainability payment, we're still working through all of that, but to be eligible for the farm sustainability payment, and this is off the top of my head, so George, if I miss anything, there will be new land eligibility rules come in from 2026, which will make all land eligible except hard features. Farm businesses will have to comply with the new farm sustainability standards, which the committee is receiving a briefing on, I think, in mid-February. Farm businesses will also have to participate in the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, participate in carbon footprinting, and participate in the Bovine Genetics Programme. Participate means joining the schemes, having the tests done, the audit done, but also then undertaking the associated training. And that's the plan for 2026.
Okay, so that's the direction of travel.
That's the direction of travel. Now, as we move forward, will, for example, a habitat assessment need to come into that? Potentially, but we're not ready to go there yet. And we're a long way off being able to require that of all farmers because the technology's not there, hasn't been tested. but it certainly would be an ambition of our current minister in terms of its improving environmental sustainability across all farms.
Okay. Just one other issue. I previously raised the issue of support to potato growers as a consequence of the floods that we had, and there was no mechanism to support them during that period of time. And similarly, given what we've experienced last week, and particularly we've got mushroom growers actually here today who are going to give us a presentation for the bill, but they themselves will also have been affected by the most recent storm. And I'm guessing there won't be any hardship payment for them either. And I suppose really going forward, I'm asking whether or not there will be a mechanism put in place for that type of crisis funding, given the reluctance of the Minister and obviously officials maybe to support any potential request. So it's really looking forward as to what that would that look like, or if there's any consideration being given for that.
As part of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme, we are seeking to develop a crisis framework, which will set out a framework for how the department would respond if there's a weather, and I'll just use a weather-related crisis, around setting up who needs to be involved in a group, how we identify the trigger points to be able to justify value for money, etc. But then if it is demonstrated as value for money through that process, the department then needs to consider where any funding would come from. And in Europe, and you'll know this, Michelle, crisis funding comes out of CAP Pillar 1. So you're talking potentially about looking at the resource DEL that is earmarked budget from FSP and a lot of the other schemes to fund those crisis measures. So there are plans to put all of this into policy papers, to put them to the Minister. Minister's already seen some of them, and that would be another presentation that would come forward to this committee around that crisis framework and how it would operate. But there's still quite a bit of work to be done on that crisis framework.
And you don't have any timeline for that?
I don't have a timeline for that. At the minute, I'll be perfectly open, there's very few working on it because we've got too many competing priorities with the resource pressures, staff resource pressures within the department.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michelle. I think we touched on that earlier on in the committee too. We're probably going to contact the department in regard to this last week's weather and the impact on food security and farmers. So, Patsy, you're indicated.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Just two fairly brief questions. Holistic intergenerational development sounds almost like a philosophical concept of some description or other. And I heard some of the measures you were talking about, workshops and that. Now, so just anybody watching this, Granda sitting in watching this, and maybe wants to chat things over, or maybe doesn't want to chat things over with a young fella later on. Can you break it down in practical concepts to the farmers who would be watching this? What does that mean? What is the actual practical support about what this means? Does it mean the department encouraging people to have those so difficult conversations within families? Because good luck on that one. But could you just break that down for people who are watching this, who are maybe in that situation, young and not so young, as what that means? The second question I have is, particularly in regard to farming for nature, and this is very contemporary at the minute, certainly where I come from, will any of those farming for nature grants or support be involving tree planting? Because why so? Where I'm from with the storm over this since last Friday, virtually every case that I've dealt with, and there have been hundreds that we've dealt with through the office, are attributable to trees falling on the lanes and the proximity of trees falling on the lanes. So it might be useful, Chair, at some stage if we did hear from NIE as to the practical elements of that, but possibly the conditionality inserted within grant aid about tree planting in the future. Anyway, what we can do about it now, I'm not so sure. But the proximity of tree planting where lanes are, electricity lines, and possibly even telephone cabling and all that sort of stuff as well, those utility lines that just have left people without power, water and indeed connectivity on the Wi-Fi. So is that a practical consideration that you've factored in? I know it's a very, very live one or maybe hasn't been live, that's the wrong word, but it's a very real one where I've come from over this last week.
Thanks, Patsy. I'll answer your first one. I'll maybe pass to Manus to answer your farming with nature question. what does it look like? I think from the questions that were coming, the first thing I would say is this is a separate work stream, and probably the committee might benefit from a presentation solely on farming for generations, and I'm just suggesting that. But in answer to your question, what does it look like? It looks like the farm family, from the granda, the father, the young fella, the tot, whatever age they are, sitting around a table and having those difficult conversations. The workshops will be those difficult conversations in terms of completing a farm business review, agreeing a succession plan, determining what development the successor needs, and the legal and financial support to do that is part of this scheme. And we realise that it's very, very difficult conversations, and that's why we've set out on a pilot. Do you, you're asking why a pilot? We need to try it. We need to try the methodology, try the pilot, see how it's working.
Well, your pilot is probably going to be with those who are willing to operate it. You know, they're the ones you really don't need to worry about. They're going to do it anyway. Could I ask just on that, like, have you engaged with the Farmers Union on the practicalities of this?
Yes. Farmers Union, again, this has been presented through the Agricultural Policy Stakeholder Group with all of those key stakeholder organisations, and they're very supportive of it. They see the need for those conversations, and that's why the co-design approach has been very, very central to all of this. Now, I will be open and say not every stakeholder organisation gets what it wants, but we reach a consensus. So it is difficult. And we recognise it's difficult. As I said, it's being delivered by Rural Support, who have experience of being in those difficult situations in terms of the delivery of the pilot. And I think, it is difficult, but we have to try something.
Yes.
So, and we're hoping for positive results. And I think, we're very, very encouraged that 110 families have so far expressed an interest in the next stage to move forward. But it's voluntary, and you're right to say it's voluntary.
It'd be useful, well, if you're coming back to us at some stage with the outcomes.
Yes.
That'd be good. And then the second
Farming with
issue.
nature.
Yep. In terms of conditionalities, the answer to that question straight out, Patsy, is no. We haven't considered that part of it. Now, in any given farm, if a farmer that applies for the tree planting option, they're provided with the autonomy to plant the trees wherever they wish to on their farm. In a lot of cases, and what we've seen in the past, is that they will plant trees along march ditches, etc., where they separate one farm from the next. I don't have any analysis to indicate the types of trees that fell or where they fell, whether roadside or wherever. And in a lot of cases, farmers will make that decision about where they plant the trees, knowing that these trees will grow out at some point. And you would hope, or you would expect in any situation, that the farmer will make the right decision about where he plants the trees on his farm, and we've handed that over to them. So we don't have any conditionalities on against that as at the minute. I've noted it as well, and will consider it along with the team going forward, and I recognise the point that you've made as well. Yeah.
And yes, the trees roadside DFI have been involved there, but most of the cases, in fact, that are still out, they're down. Trees fell in lanes, and they're through fields, across bogland, all that sort of stuff, wherever they've come down. And they've just taken the wires with them and everything. But anyway, so that's a point for consideration. Chair, can I make a suggestion that maybe at some stage, if we could get a wee while with NIE, whenever things have settled a bit, to get a clearer picture on this? Would that be okay?
Absolutely. I think earlier on in the meeting we considered that, and I mentioned our conversation too in regard to this. So that's going to be pulled through, Patsy, for sure. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of issues in relation to those not eligible for new farm sustainability payment. You reckon there's going to be 1,926 plus 400? 500,
yeah.
So 2,400. Is there, the department makes the decision on this?
We have looked at the data that we hold to identify those businesses. We'll be writing out to those, and again, if a business feels that they shouldn't be on that list, they'll have the opportunity to come back and provide evidence to support.
Is there any appeal mechanism?
Initially, we're working through the process to set that up, but initially they'll be able to respond and come back with any additional evidence to support why they think that they shouldn't be on the list, and then it'll work from there.
The other issue is the entitlements that they hold. There's a short period for them to get rid of those entitlements. I think the time frame is 15th of May 26. Does that not leave a glut in the market of entitlements? Should they not get more time to remove those entitlements?
What we hope to do is we hope to communicate as soon as we would hopefully have the legislation in place with those businesses impacted. We're hoping to take the draft affirmative legislation to the Assembly in early February for debate and motion. I think date has still to be confirmed. But if, and let's be positive, that legislation goes through, we would hope to be in contact with those impacted farmers fairly quickly so that they could be thinking about it during 2025 and then decide what to do by the 15th of May 2026. So it's not a short period. It's a short period in terms of when the entitlement trading window is open from the 1st of March 26 to the 15th of May 26. But that's the case every year. Is there going to be a glut on the market? This will also coincide with a change in the land eligibility rules, which will increase the amount of eligible land that is available in Northern Ireland, so we do not see a case where there will be a glut of entitlements.
One could cancel that out in essence.
Potentially.
Okay.
And that's why we moved, part of why we moved it back to coincide with that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, William. And JB.
Chair, thank you. And thanks to the panel here as well on the information presented. Can I just be reminded before we go forward, and I think we've clarified that the Ulster Farmers Union are part of the Agri-Policy Stakeholder Group. Can we be reminded of all of the participants in that group before we move forward?
Certainly the organisations who are members of the Agricultural Policy Stakeholder Group are the Ulster Farmers Union, Northern Ireland Agricultural Producers Association, NIAPA, NIFTA, Northern Ireland Food and Drink Association, Northern Ireland Environment Link, which has representation within it from RSPB, from National Trust, from Ulster Wildlife. Also we have the Dairy Council, we have the British Veterinary Association, we have the Northern Ireland Meat Exporters Association and the Northern Ireland Great Trade Association. So all those organisations, and those members, to be fair, give up of their time to come to all meetings and to respond when we ask them a series of questions. They go back to their membership in their organisations and provide us with detailed responses, which we then take forward to our Minister, saying here's the views of A, B and C, here's the consensus view, or there are mixed views, and ultimately Minister has made the policy decisions with the views of that stakeholder group known to him.
And that has helped shape the
that has
thing
helped
right
shape,
through the
yes,
process.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Nicola, you've indicated online. We're having technical problems with the unmuting.
There we go now. Sorry, I can't myself on it. Thank you, Chair. And actually, I need to declare an interest because my partner is actually named on a farm business as well. But thank
Oh, that's way again.
off again.
Back on.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you for the presentation there, Rosemary George and Manus. Listen, I suppose the first point, it's already been covered here, but I do think that communication point to the farming community is key. Like these issues, they're really complex and it's hard for people to get their head around. And lots of the farmers that I represent locally would be part-time farmers. They have a full-time job and have lots of other things taking up their time, and then trying to get their head around all this here. It's difficult, it's challenging. So I do think the rollout of those information sessions that the Minister has suggested is actually a really good idea. And I know we'd actually held some locally last year when this was first kind of mooted, so and they were useful. So we'd like to be kept in the loop and not there. In regards to the ring fence money, I know this was talked about before too, and obviously it's very welcome that the Finance Minister and the Executive agreed to ring fence that money again, essentially. But can I ask what the department is doing, or what contingency plans they have if this money isn't ring fenced in the future, you know, in following years, if there are going to be issues with this type of funding? Have the department got any type of contingency plan in place?
I think, to be fair, at the minute I don't have a contingency plan in place within my division, and that's really a question for our finance director, who I think is coming forward to the committee in the perhaps next week. That's not a question, Nicola, that I can really answer.
Okay, that's fair, Rosemary, all right. The other thing I want to pick up on was, it's already been discussed as well, but about the limitations to the eligibility for, so you have to have had agricultural activities during 2020 and 2021. And I know, George, there you'd said there's about 2,400 being eligible, and there's an appeals process in that there. But for those that will be deemed, even after an appeals process possibly, that they're still ineligible, are there any other types of support for them, or what supports have the department in place for the likes of those farmers?
Well, the simple answer to that is all that will do will exclude those farmers from being eligible for farm sustainability payments. They will still be eligible for all of the other schemes except beef carbon reduction and suckler cows, the suckler cow scheme. All of the other schemes, if they meet the eligibility requirements, those schemes are there, and they can avail of those.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay, that's all I wanted to ask, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Okay. Members, have you any more questions? I know we're going to have a bit of a discussion off the back of this as the officials maybe move. I am struck by a couple of things. One is that Nicola used the term ring fenced, but I used the term earmarked because it's earmarked is what's in the legislation. Could you just tell me if there's any technical difference between earmarked and ring fenced? And secondly, on that, what I'm looking at in terms of the ESR in particular legislation is when you get down to the bill, the interpretations is incredible. The level of a need for interpretations of different changes to the names of schemes adds to the complexity. And we've had a former minister here ask really good questions, a former chair with considerable experience, and we're trying to get our head around it. And I wouldn't confidently say that I have at this stage, to be honest, whilst I can get the absolute intent and the ambition of it. But when we step off into a sector and obviously get debate in the chamber, we want to be making sure we're batting from a very firm base. So in that regard, could you just tell me about the difference in earmarked and ring fenced and the fact, and then we'll have a discussion about where maybe the committee want to go with this.
In terms of, and I'm not an accountant, I don't see a difference between ring fenced and earmarked. But again, if I could ask you to pose that question to the finance director of the department, certainly when it initially came from Treasury, it was ring fenced Treasury funding. The executive has decided, finance minister and executive have decided to call it earmarked. My understanding.
Animals, is it? No.
Sorry?
Maybe it's because it's agriculture and there's more animals.
Don't really know, but I don't perceive there to be a difference, and it has to be used for the functions as laid out in legislation. Okay.
And I think hopefully you've got a feel from some pretty experienced politicians today that we're really trying to get head around it. I think, well, I'll not second guess what the members are going to say about that, but I just want to thank you for your time today, and I'm sure we'll continue again soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, so regarding the SL1, as has been said and read in it, the procedure is draft affirmative. There will be a debate in plenary when the Minister lays it. However, a couple of issues were raised in regard to, and to be fair, Rosemary did speak about the stakeholder group who have been engaged. I don't know in terms of the committee whether you feel a bit more engagement on our behalf, just if there's space. The difficulty is obviously if the Minister lays the SR as he can because it's draft affirmative, we may have a compressed timescale, but I would like just a wee bit maybe assurance. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose I'm going to get on my soapbox again just in relation to SRs. We're spending quite a considerable amount of time, and rightly so, in relation to the agriculture bill. This bill, which essentially is secondary legislation, but it's still in its own right a substantial piece of legislation, which is actually going to dictate payments for perhaps a generation of farmers, and for us to spend an hour or less and then to agree, I think, is not showing due diligence on behalf of this committee. And I accept, and I know that John asked who was sitting on the steering group, and I absolutely get the fact that it's well represented, but I think that this committee still needs to hear from stakeholders with regards to the impact of this, because this could come back to bite us later on, because it's our offices that will be having to defend the decisions that are made going forward with regard to some of the complexities around this. So just from our own perspective, I think that we should be giving this a little bit more time.
Yeah, I'm content with that myself, but obviously we're a committee. John, are you happy enough, or do you
I'm
want
not. I'll there be a vote.
Yeah.
We haven't had an hour's debate. We've had a year's debate. If you timeline back on the previous briefings, previous presentations and papers that are clearly illustrated in bold black and white on our briefing pack today, and that were referred to a number of times during the presentation. The Chair, I'm flagging up, I've done it before, I'll do it again, and I'll do it unapologetically, that I don't think it's a coincidence that matters here, particularly those relating to the environment, are being deferred, delayed and negated on a regular basis, and I will continue to challenge that. And I'll sum it up by saying that if political change could come at the same rate as climate change, then the world would be a better place, and Northern Ireland would be, and so would our agri industry and all of our communities as a consequence of that. So for those reasons and many more, I will not vote to delay more progress. I am satisfied that a very wide range of sectoral interests have been represented in shaping what's before us, have expressed to the Department and to the Minister their satisfaction in what is before us, and therefore I see no logical reason to delay, other than to further drag out environmental matters and further damaging the environmental aspect of the work of this committee and prioritising other matters.
Just before you come into that, I think to be fair, I don't think one of the things, I don't think we can delay the Minister in terms of if the Minister wants to delay the SR, because it's affirmative procedure. So if the Minister chooses to lay the SR on, to be fair, he can do it anyway. So this committee today will not be seeking to delay the Minister. I think you're right, just on your point, because I did pick out the piece about the 3 hectares, which I wasn't here in May of last year, so I do know, having read the papers, that the committee has had briefings and the committee has spoken and the Minister has listened. Where I would, where I have a bit of a bit more of a nervousness is the bit in and around the young farmers and that type of thing. And I think Rosemary answered the question well enough, but what Rosemary also said, John, to be fair and to be accurate, is that there are a range of views and not everybody gets what they want. So it wasn't that everybody was absolutely happy. But what I would probably want to know is which bits maybe they weren't happy with, which bits they would. And I do believe that, because I haven't had any communications from those groups, and I'm sure they're well aware, I suspect that I would be more content to hear views. If you want to push it to vote, I don't mind, and I'm happy to do that. But I think the Minister can still do it. I think we're within our rights to seek just an update from some of those concerned groups if they want to present to us. But if we're going to do that, to take your point on board, we do it next week if we can schedule it, and if not next week, very, very soon after that. I'm just I know the clerk's sort of going at me, but at the same time, your points are well made in terms of the environmental pieces that we need to make sure we keep the pedal on too, and it's to get the right balance.
Chair, I just want to be clear. It's the thing that the red flag that popped up for me was the young farmer, the new entrant. That was nothing else was really that. No, I was familiar with everything else, but that was something that has just come up, and I really am concerned that would have a very disadvantaging impact on a new farmer who doesn't have the benefit of being able to inherit entitlements, say within their family or whatever. I just think that a farmer who wants a fresh start with their own land and their own entitlements, that this would prohibit them from doing that. I would leave them having to go to farmers who don't want or don't need their entitlements. And I think it just doesn't allow them to have that fresh start, and I just think that needs to be teased out. That's all. That would be the big thing I would have.
Thank you, Declan.
Chair, just for clarification, and I have to come back on the comments from John Blair. I mean, this isn't an issue with regards to it being an environmental piece of legislation. I have this issue, and the clerk will back me up on this, where I feel that as a scrutiny committee, we need to spend time, whenever we receive a piece of legislation, that it is our duty to spend time scrutinising it, regardless of what it is and regardless of which committee it is in. I think that this is what we should be doing. We go to the Assembly Chamber and we are chastised because there isn't legislation coming, primary legislation coming from the executive. And yet all of our committees are dealing with legislation on a weekly basis, but it is secondary legislation. And I don't think that it's given the time that it deserves, because these are actually given enabling powers and actually can be quite critical as to what their outcomes are. And I think we need, as a committee, to be taking that seriously. And I'm not saying that to offend Mr. Blair and what he said, but I mean, this is really, I think we should be taking this much more seriously as a principle.
And I'm not saying this to offend either, and I mean it sincerely. But I meant what I said about climate and the environment. And I'll keep saying, if it's a weekly basis on the same comments, I'll keep making them. And that's not to offend either, nor is this when I say it. There was no keenness for scrutiny, or delayed scrutiny, or prolonged scrutiny, or any scrutiny. When people collapsed this place, year after year, time after time, and didn't produce, legislate or scrutinise anything. So that's not going to sit easy with me, and I'll challenge that one too every time.
No problem. Patsy.
Chair, look, a week or two is not going to make a wild pile of difference. Last week we were sitting here discussing legislation that had lapsed since 2021. You know, and that was about enforcement powers for the department and all that. So a week or two is not going to make a wild pile of difference. Now, we're hearing from the department, they're professional people and all that, and we accept their view. But there are other people out there that are going to be crucially affected by this. I personally would like to hear directly from them. So your idea is a good suggestion, and I'm happy to run with that myself.
Okay. Members, so we can do this one or two ways. My suggestion is that, given that the Minister can lay the SR as and when he likes, and I'm sure, from my perspective, my dealings with him, he seems to be listening. So I suspect that it may be a couple of weeks before it's laid. It gives us an opportunity to reach in to some of the stakeholder members that we're discussing and try and rule a meeting. Then we'll have a look at the forward work plan if members are minded. What I would suggest is, in the interests of time, and the clerk will kick me for this, if we need to convene a special single sitting on a Tuesday morning or something to expedite it, and this hopefully would help, will give John some confidence too that the committee is minded to do these things in as good a time as we can. Because, and to John's point as well, guys, this came today. Yes, it's the first look we've had at the bill when we got it under packs, but the conversation has been going on for a period of time too. So there's multiple levels to this. So are members minded that we don't put it to vote today? John's points are on the record if that's the case, because that gives us the space to try and convene a quick meeting. William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not that we as a party or my colleagues against this legislation. We didn't say we were. We felt that it needs more scrutiny, and especially the Ulster Farmers Union. I think it'll be wise for us to hear the wider views, as you have said. I mean, put it to vote today, I think would be very foolish. I think it'll be wrong to do that. I think we need just to scrutinise a little more and see how we get on.
Anya, you have your camera on. Are you wanting to come on, or are you just letting us see your face? You okay? Are you happy enough? Content? Okay, unless there's a difference of opinion, are you content then that the committee urgently seeks the opinion of those that the Department have identified in terms of that stakeholder group, but perhaps facilitate a meeting with, like, if we can do it within a week, but probably within the next 2 weeks? Obviously, with Gillian's departure and stuff, we're going to be although we've got an able replacement. Minded, John? Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, it sounds already to me that a week or two is going to become a month or two, and I'll point that out as well. There's no definite timeline here. The only definite timeline I have in front of me is that this has already been discussed for many, many months. At one point of the paper, it says today, presented and no issues were raised. This is what we're at here.
Yeah, no, I get that.
And separately, the officials who were with us moments ago made absolutely clear that the committee will be briefed and consulted, and discussions will be had with us at every stage as we approach further aspects of what's before us. That was all made clear to us today.
Is it very specifically on really the content of some of the FL1 that we want to hear on?
I
Just
believe so.
before
Yes,
we
in terms
don't
of
want to hear from the Ulster Farmers Union on the entire farm support programme.
No, because there have
we
been
have before.
Yes. And I think it's in terms of, it's just so that any meeting that we do set up is focused and that it doesn't stray into opening up things that have been previously discussed. The particular piece in around the young farmers, and I know that we had given sort of the alternative routes, but I'm not sure that was particularly well understood and accepted, and I think there might be potentially barriers there in your piece as well, Michelle. I don't know how...
Well, Chair, I think in respect, whenever I asked very specifically how would a new entrant who bought 50 acres land get entitlements, the department very clearly said you had to lease them or purchase them if another farmer doesn't need them.
Well, say this, Declan, if we can afford to buy 50 acres of land, he can afford to buy entitlements.
Good point.
Glad you said that, William, not me.
I do think a new entrant deserves a fresh start.
Members, can I just ask in the interest of time, so we're going to take a meeting, but for those particularly who have specific questions in around the information that we would seek in the meeting, to put it through to the clerk, just to ensure we've got some of the detail here, but we'll confirm it, and we'll make sure the agenda is tight. Is that okay?
And is it just the Ulster Farmers Union?
Usually you're the Young Farmers Club as Ulster.
Young Farmers Club, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Young Farmers Clubs as well. Yep. Okay.
And can we just, between us, even refresh the list of the, they didn't call it the stakeholder group, they called it the, but it is the stakeholder group.
It's an advisory group, I think.
Yeah, advisory group or whatever, let's just refresh that so we can have a scan through it. No Rosemary read through it seemed to be fine. To be fair, again, from the department's perspective, it was comprehensive. It was a big group of...
Yeah. Agriculture policy stakeholder group.
Yep.
Okay. Refresh it. Thank you, members.
And Chair, I would request that the views of all of those who sit in that group be sought collectively. Am I right? Or is it one group from that, or two groups from that, or three groups from that? I'm not suggesting that we bring them all individually. I'm opposed to what we're doing, by the way, and I hope that's recorded. I would prefer to vote on these matters for reasons of clarity. But I need to know who we're speaking to, exactly who. Is it the collective view of that group we're seeking, even though we've already heard it today? Or is it individual members of that group or a number of members of that group? None of this is clear to us at this stage, and yet we're just about to make a decision.
To be fair, John, what's neither clear is the fact that, and this is the case with all consultations, you get a range of views, some are good, some are bad, nobody gets everything they want. What we don't know is, you get a consensus. What we don't know is what any of them said. So I take your point, and I think what we'll do is that's why I wanted to get the list, so that we hopefully, if we have the contacts for them through the department, through Shauna, we can contact them all, say we've had a briefing from the department, we're interested in this, and just give them the department's perspective.
Sorry, if a department has a stakeholder group on any issue, separate the SL1 before us, and that group tasked with coming to a conclusion or a series of recommendations has done its job. Are we seriously going to start writing to these people and picking them off one by one as to what their individual views were in that matter? I'm not happy at all with that process, and I'll absolutely be voting against that one. But that is actually, let's be clear, that's why I've just asked the question, are we looking at the collective view of the group or the views of individual members of that group? And I need to know that, because if what's been suggested, what I think is being suggested is correct, then we are picking off individual members of the group to see what their views are, and treating them differently than the others, or separating them off completely. Can I have that clarified?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's what anybody's looking at all. We're not looking at what is raised with the members that we have. Issues have been raised here, and if they want to raise anything with us, they can. We can't compel anybody to come here. But John, what I will say is, this committee, if I'm going to legislate in that chamber, I want to know what I'm legislating on. It's as simple as that. And I
asked the question, I'm sure about the members of the group.
And that case being, John, I think there are a significant range of people who are likely to be affected by this. And I'm, I don't think we're looking at disclosure of anything that steering group has done. I think my perspective would be that we're interested in it. If any of those members wants to give us any information, that's fine. If they don't, they don't. If nobody has any issues with it,
we're asking them all individually.
Well, but my point was it'd be foolish of us to pick off one or two. Unless you think it'd be foolish of us to we can't pick.
If I know that
we can't pick one or two.
Not to the group, but each member off it, and I'm deeply concerned about that. Yeah. I've made that clear. I'm not at all in support of that. But I'm clear that the decision is likely to be we're writing to each member of that group individually. Okay.
Yeah, yes. No.
I think we've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent with this.
At all.
Because really, what I was interested in hearing was for those groups who were going to be impacted, and it was quite clear in the presentation that came through from the department was that there was a group that was going to be adversely affected and with greater impact, and that was obviously on the young farmers, and that's what I wanted to hear from the young farmers, and obviously as associate membership of the UFU, because they are those who are going to be most impacted by these changes.
I think there'd be almost a nil return from most of them anyway, because I think the legislation will actually impact more aggressively or whatever on a certain group. But I do take John's point that we can't cherry pick either. I think if the department have determined that there's an advisory group and they've identified them, I think we could do them a discourtesy by neglecting any of them. So I think they all should have an opportunity of either making a nil return, no return, or there is no concerns, or we did.
There's, I think I'm clear, no desire here to seek the environmental view as to any benefits that's coming out of what's before us. No, clearly not.
Are they part of the advisory panel of the department? I mean, the department set the standard for that, John. So we'll take the step. We're not looking to usurp the department, and I think from my perspective, I'd be looking to help them. I just don't understand some of it. I'd like to be clear on. I think it reads pretty well, and there was a good representation made by the department today.
Chair, if we're writing, if there's agreement to write to the groups on that, are we seeking a written response in a certain time frame on whatever issues they have, particularly around the new entrance issue, or are we seeking them to give a general response to the SL1? Because I think we need to focus it on the SL1 here, because the whole farm support programme is so huge, and we will hear about it going forward and have already heard about aspects of it.
Well, keeping this focused to the SL1, if we're agreed, are we agreed on that?
But would you be content with receiving written briefings within like a 2-week window, or do you feel you need to then hear from somebody in person, which will be more difficult given that the work programme is tight?
And I thought my proposal was quite simple, and I just wanted to get an oral briefing from the UFU and from the Young Farmers Clubs, because they were the ones who were going to be impacted by this. Now, they may come back and have no issue, and that might be fine, but it's just the fact that this is obviously a piece of legislation which is going to have quite an impact going forward, and I felt that it would be useful to have their take on it.
I think if we're content with the written briefing, I think we take the list of the wider stakeholders. And it's not going to take any more time. And if we're taking the written briefings, it's not going to take us any more time either. It means that we've done our due diligence by ensuring that nobody was locked out of the consultation by this committee, because we have to look at everything: agriculture, rural affairs, and the environment.
It may be that obviously I haven't looked at the list in detail, it may be that the young farmers aren't on that list, I'm not sure yet. So if they are not on that, can't we include them, given
I think they inevitably have to, they're named in the legislation.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if they weren't.
I'd say the time we've spent discussing this, we could probably have heard a fair wee bit of evidence from some of the stakeholders.
I would have thought, sir, sorry, I'm going to come back on that comment from Patsy there. I would have thought the discussion was part of the scrutiny process, which is apparently so valuable. I make no apology for asking questions or expressing when I'm not comfortable with something, and if there's any suggestion that I should do otherwise, then I would challenge the democratic fundamentals of such a suggestion.
Okay, no, I think that's the case. So, in that regard, guys, where we are is we're going to look at the list as supplied by the department, ensure the young farmers are on it, contact them with regard to the SL1, and just seek any views that they have on it. I mean, all it's going to do at the end of the day is going to assist us in our debate in the chamber when it comes. The SR will be lodged very shortly anyway.
Just for clarity, you're not planning to invite them to come to committee then to give some evidence on this? Because there may be questions that members have, which are particular scenarios that might be useful.
Well, what we could do is, I mean, if there was a desire on their part to give, if they can provide it by written, I would prefer that. If they want in person, the caveat would be it has to be complete within the next 2 weeks, and then members would have to make themselves available. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Chair, do you wish me to just give them, like, if we get a letter out tomorrow, or
Yeah.
do you wish me to just give them a week to reply in writing, or no, 2 weeks? Yes, 2 weeks.
It would all have to be completed in 2 weeks, either
Yeah.
written or in person. But if it's written, then you can't come back after 2 weeks.
Chair, this is something that going forward will likely change in terms of timescales of SL1, and I know Michelle had popped into my office to ask me about that, but at this point in time there isn't the new procedure in place for how, between the Assembly and the departments. So. Okay.
Members, it's now 1:45. I'm just going to say, does anybody need to take a comfort break before we move on to agenda item 8? Yes?
We do.
Okay, can we
Sorry,
just take a very quick, literally 2-minute comfort break, and then we will start again, and we'll move out of committee. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is the Agriculture Bill briefing from the Northern Ireland Mushroom Growers Association. Members, I refer you to pages 15 to 17 of the table papers for this item, which is that briefing. I also refer you to pages 96 to 116 of the pack for the Agricultural Bill, the Explanatory and Financial Memorandum, and the Raised Bill paper, and to pages 18 to 19 of the table papers for correspondence dated the 20th of January from the Executive Office to NIMGA. Members, as you will recall at our meeting on the 12th of December, we agreed to invite NIMGA to give an oral briefing on any issues or concerns they may have on the bill. The briefing paper proposes that the legislation is amended to retain 4.1% as the baseline above which the Minister can exercise discretionary powers, and that the proposals to repeal the scheme is removed or replaced with at least the same level of support as was available under the FVAS. The paper also sets out proposals as to how the PO scheme could be enhanced going forward, and also outlines what action NIMGA believes the committee could take to assist members. The letter from TEO to NIMGA focuses on the labour issues and states that the FM and DFM are aware, through the ERA Minister, of the labour challenges faced by the mushroom sector here in the due to the UK immigration policy rules, and Minister Muir has raised these issues with DEFRA. The letter expresses disappointment that the ERA's Minister's suggestion of the introduction of a 2-year occupation-specific bespoke visa route to help ensure that the sector could continue to compete with their counterparts in Ireland was not accepted by the UK Government. Members, I welcome the following representatives from NIMGA to brief the committee and answer any questions on that briefing. Mr John McCardle, Deputy Chairperson of NIMGA, you're very welcome, and Mr Martin McKee, Member of NIMGA. And I apologise for keeping you waiting, but we had a rather heavy evidence session just passed. So if you want to give your briefing, thank you.
Okay. Chairperson, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on behalf of the Northern Ireland Mushroom Growers Association. The mushroom sector is a key part of the agri-food industry, contributing 42 million annually, with an additional 22 million in the local supply chain. It is a significant employer and provides 10% of all mushrooms and 40% of organic mushrooms across the UK. However, our industry is at a critical juncture. The Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme is the only substantial support mechanism available to us. Any reduction or removal of this scheme without a clear, fully funded replacement would have a devastating consequences for mushroom growers. We are calling on the NI Executive to forcefully amend the legislation to retain the 4.1% as the baseline, the minimum level at which the Minister can exercise discretionary powers. This safeguard is crucial in maintaining essential support. And secondly, remove or replace the proposals to repeal the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme, ensuring that if the scheme is withdrawn, it is immediately replaced with a new scheme that provides at least the same level of support developed in consultation with the mushroom sector. Why does this matter? The mushroom industry relies on the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme, which currently provides 1.6 million in support annually. Other existing schemes do not meet our needs. DEFRA has not outlined how it will replace the Fruit and Veg Aid Scheme, leaving Northern Ireland growers in limbo. DEFRA must step in to provide certainty. The Irish Government has invested €19 million in its horticulture sector annually, including schemes that directly benefit mushroom growers. Without comparable support, Northern Ireland mushroom growers will struggle to compete. Recent events, such as the storm, have put additional financial strains on growers, with insurance failing to cover losses. The proposals we would put for an enhanced PO scheme Instead of reducing support, we believe that the potential to grow the industry. Currently, only 40% of mushrooms sold in the UK are grown here. This represents an opportunity to enhance the PO scheme. We propose revising recognition criteria to make it easier for growers to perform a PO, ensuring CAPEX items purchased through the PO remain with primary producers, introducing a 7-year scheme to allow for the long-term investment, providing 80% funding for automation and robotics in line with EU standards, incentivising environmental and R&D actions with funding comparable to EU's 80% support, increasing flexibility and funding for promotional activities. The committee has stated the committee will note that we forwarded the correspondence with the First and Deputy First Minister. This follows on from a letter and paper NIMGA submitted, which included and asked to follow up on a commitment from the Deputy First Minister to Michelle McIlveen that she was content to attend any possible meetings with the Home Office alongside the First Minister and Deputy First Minister plus the Economy Minister. The correspondence informed us that the officials of the DFE and DERA are working collaboratively to develop an immigration policy position paper, which will reflect the issues emerging in the agri-food industry. Whilst we welcome collaborative working on this, the issues facing by the mushroom sector are not new nor emerging, and so it is hard to hear about policies emerging in due course given the urgency and indeed opportunity facing our industry. We asked the committee to, firstly, table an amendment to Clause 1, inserting 4.1% as the minimum level of support with the options for enhancements. Secondly, ensure the scheme cannot be revoked without a replacement or a direct replacement that maintains current funding and is developed with industry input. Thirdly, press the Minister and Executive to secure a meeting with the UK Government on a bespoke visa scheme for the mushroom sector. And lastly, establish a safety net to protect growers from external shocks as seen in other parts of agriculture. In conclusion, the mushroom industry is at risk, but is also a significant potential. With the right support, we can grow, enhance food security, strengthen our rural economy. We urge the committee to take the steps to protect and support this vital sector. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Martin, for coming and joining us today. It's something we've spoke about a number of times now on committee, so it's good to have you guys here front and centre with us today. And thank you for your paper, including the inclusion of a number of areas where you think we can help. I think there's certainly a couple of them that this committee would have the various to discuss. There's a couple of them would sit outside our various just in regard to something we're interested in, particularly in around the visas and stuff. But obviously, it's we would try to basically be encouraging the Minister in that regard. So as Chair, I'll just open up if that's okay. You recommend that DERA put in place a safety net scheme to ensure that the mushroom sector is protected from shocks outside of their control. That's available for other parts of horticulture and agriculture. What sort of things do you feel that scheme could cover and provide for?
Well, just given this last weekend, several mushroom growers or more mushroom growers have taken a hit. Myself personally, in the last 2 storms, it's cost me 80,000. I'm not insured for that. We can't get insurance from the Farmers Union for polytones, so I'm struggling to get out of this. So personally, there's that there. Last year with the bad weather, people may think that mushrooms, because they're growing inside, that it's not affected with the wet weather. We are affected by straw. So when the price of straw went up, our compost went up. It went up £20 a tonne. Again, personally, it cost me £1,500 a week extra. Before that there was a Ukraine war. Every year there's something that is completely out of our control has hit us. On DERA's website, the basic single payment or the farm sustainability payment going forward, it says that this is the farmer's safety net. We're not eligible for it. We have brought this to the attention of the department, but it doesn't seem to be getting through that we need a safety net.
You'd mentioned about the scope for expansion. You said about 40% of the mushrooms sold in the UK are grown here.
Yeah. No, 40% of UK mushrooms are grown in the UK. 10% of mushrooms, we cover, Northern Ireland covers 10% of mushrooms in the UK sales. Okay. Actually, organic mushrooms is higher than that there. We grow between 40 and 50% of organic mushrooms sold in the UK.
Okay. And you think there's scope to expand that?
Oh, there's definitely a scope to expand it. Like if we had the same support which our counterparts in ROI has, I have no doubt that the industry could double here. It is that much the support that they have through investments. Me personally, I want to expand my business. It'd be better option for me for going 15 miles down the road across the border and starting completely afresh with the support that's available. But I don't want to do that. I want to stay in Northern Ireland. I want to support Northern Ireland economy.
And in terms of the scheme in the south, then obviously we know the fiscal part of it. In terms of the mechanisms, what is that money available for in the schemes in the south? Do you know?
There's a number of different mechanisms available in the south. We talk about robotics and automation, and it is the future for mushrooms. It is coming down the line. They had a scheme last year that started it. I know they're lobbying hard for schemes from next year on. There's a trial going on in Monaghan for robotics right now for picking mushrooms, which would ease our visa problem, but unfortunately it'll take time to filter down through it. So it'll take 4 or 5 years for that to happen. So therefore, that's why we keep going back to the visa issue, because they have a 3-year visa which can be extended out for a further 2 years, which then puts them at a 5-year visa. Now, if we were to take that there, pro rata that there is what it's going to cost us. That there is costing us around 72,000 more than what our competitors in the south for one position. So. As far as support schemes is concerned, they have the PO scheme in the south. They do avail of the 4.1%. They get 80% of environmental aspects and research funded. So, we know growers in the south that are putting through on battery systems, which would have helped alleviate some of the costs that are losses that we would have had, because we would have had that bit of backup until we got things sorted out whenever the electric went off this year. There's also it helps improve quality of product. It helps improve productivity. They have a horticultural scheme in the south which helps increase capacity. So you name it and they have it. Whereas the only thing that we have at this present moment in time is the fruit and veg scheme, and we don't know what's happening. We're at this stage. I appreciate the Agri has to go through the processes. The Agri bill is leaving yourselves towards the end of May. We're creeping closer and closer towards the end of this year. We have to plan ahead. We can't not. And that's our biggest problem is we don't know what's coming down the line. We don't know where we're standing coming at the end of this year. How do we plan for next year? How do we plan to grow our businesses? How do we plan to survive our business? How do we plan to upgrade our business? We don't know what's coming. So,
thank you. Patsy?
Yep. So, essentially what's your ask?
Our ask is that the fruit and veg aid scheme is be amended so that there is the commitment to the 4.1% investment.
And that legislation don't go ahead that's going to accept yourselves from that?
If we propose that there's an amendment put to the legislation that the 4% one goes in.
Secondly, I'm listening to you there about the workers, the labour problem.
Yeah.
Did the executive office not give you assurances at one stage that they were going to meet with the UK government on this?
Yeah, the executive officers were to get together cross-departmental and meet with the Home Office, and we have heard nothing back.
How long is that going on, just?
How long are we shouting about visas? We're shouting about visas.
No,
twice
sorry.
too. From the other, it was
everybody shouting about visas, specifically that item with the executive office.
I believe it was September, October last year.
2024.
2024.
Right, okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Good question, Patsy. John?
Yeah, thanks, John. Martin, too, good to see you. I'm keen to know, and you've touched on it, just the level of support on a sort of interdepartmental basis across the executive. What more is needed? Does sort of intervention needed, like we saw with pork producers previously? The kind of thing we saw various similar interventions during COVID, for example. Is that what's needed, or are you thinking more longer term? And I think you are, but I probably want to hear that for you. And then about another question, decarbonisation as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, on the shorter term, obviously we've took a hit. Mushroom growers have took a hit. We've took in this storm and last year and the year before, and we've got absolutely no help for it. So our pots are running dry and well running dry, and we're in the red at this stage. In the longer term, we need this support. Like the ROI has the equivalent of the fruit and veg aid scheme. They have that there for 7 years. so they can plan ahead for 7 years in advance. So they know what's coming down there, and they know what they can invest in this year, what they can invest in next year, what they can invest in the year after. So they can plan ahead. So like, we're going to do this year, that's going to improve X. We're going to do this next year, that's going to improve Y, and they can continue to grow their industry. Whereas we don't know what's coming at all, so we have no idea what's coming down the line. We don't know where the funding's going to come from. Not only on the fruit and veg aid scheme, but if we take the farm business investment scheme, the old scheme, there was. It takes that long and it's that competitive. Like I said in a previous meeting, I applied for the Farm Business Investment Scheme in May 22, and it took to December 23 to get a letter of offer. That's 18 months sitting still, and you don't know why you're going to get the letter of offer and then you have to start planning ahead again. So you're 3 years down the line before you can put anything in process, and that's very hard to work in our industry. That's where we're coming from. As far as that's what we want to see. We want to see stability over the longer term. Like we've brought these issues to the different departments. We've brought it to Rosemary, who was here before. We brought it to Alison Chambers. We brought it to Caffrey. Like the horticulture pilot scheme, which is on the Rosemary's remit. We're and again, this is one of the bugbears for me. The stats for Northern Ireland agriculture put mushroom industry at 26 million. We're at 40, 41, 42 million.
Just to be clear, John, are there things do you think that other executive ministers could do to assist as well?
We have met with the Department of Economy Minister, and the legislation is restrictive to what they can offer for us because we're primary agricultural producers. Okay.
And as primary producers, what is your ability to secure support from whatever source for decarbonisation? As I said, I was going to ask a question on decarbonisation and sustainability, as these are key to the agri sector, of course, first of all, but also key if you want to grow in terms of the economics of what you're doing, and then grow the contribution towards climate targets as well.
Yeah, mushroom growers have used the PO scheme and the fruit and veg aid scheme to help improve efficiencies, to put in renewables, to put in biomass boilers, to do all them things so that we can improve our efficiency and reduce our carbon footprint. Our carbon footprint is very low compared to that of beef and sheep and pork and all the rest of that. We're very low, but we want to improve on that again going forward. Our only mechanism for doing that there at this present moment in time is the fruit and veg aid scheme. Whenever it goes, we don't have anything. We also want to one of the other points which we are working on as an industry is the reduction of peat and doing away with peat and peat-free mushrooms. But that comes at a cost, and that will be a substantial cost to the industry. So we would need help on that front, through transition to it.
Yeah.
Sorry, does that?
Yep.
Hey, John, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Patsy. Michelle?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I know we've obviously met before and had discussions around some of the challenges that you have, particularly around access to workforce, and obviously continue to advocate for you in respect of that. I appreciate that there is a challenge for you with regards to the amount of support that you do get from the department, and I've put some questions in with regards to that, and I'm probably quite shocked actually at the level of support that there is. You have referenced the issue around hardship support and crisis support, which I raised previously there with Rosemary. Have you had recent conversations with the department around that particular issue? And obviously the plans moving forward are to look at some sort of framework of support. Have you had any conversations with regards to that as well?
Over the past 6 months, we've met with Rosemary. We mentioned the safety net with Rosemary, and we didn't get any joy or any assistance. We were pushed towards, and we like I said, I mentioned the horticultural pilot scheme, and we mentioned that it isn't relevant to us going forward. So that I don't know if that's been relayed up to the Minister or not, because the Minister, every time we have correspondence from the Minister, he pushes us towards the horticultural pilot scheme, but the horticultural pilot scheme is not something which is relevant to us. It's not something used to us. we've met with Caffrey, or I spoke with Caffrey earlier this week, our representative in the department, who would look after mushrooms, and asked them, you know, said about the damage, and he says, that's Tara. So that's the support we're getting from the department.
Okay.
None.
And just to be clear, whenever we talk about the legislation is amended to retain 4.1% as the baseline, what, in real terms, what does that mean?
In monetary terms, well, the VMP of the mushroom industry is around 40 million. So 4.1% of that there would be 1.6 million per annum. So it would be that's in monetary terms.
Okay. And Chair, I suppose I'm conscious that we are spending a bit of time on this, and if you'll excuse the pun, I suppose some of us are probably in the dark around the mushroom sector, and maybe even sort of being on site to see what it is you do.
Yep.
And I suppose I would suggest, if it is possible within our schedule, that we do actually go out on site, perhaps to meet with some of the growers, just to see what they do, and obviously the impact, particularly the fact that you are very sort of weather dependent too.
Yes, so by all means, you're more than welcome. We had Minister Steve Baker out on a farm, and his view of the mushroom industry from before till after he had the meeting completely changed. It's okay talking about it, but until you see a mushroom industry in action, and how mushrooms grow, and what work we do, it's very hard. It's very hard to visualise it. We're just not field based, and everybody has that vision of agriculture and the fields and crops and stuff like that. We're not like that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Just noticed in our pack, we do have a response from the Executive Office in regards to your request to engage on the visa stuff, and I think they're noting that the Agriculture Minister has been engaged in that area, but we can certainly, and we have been as a committee, interested in pushing on that. We've spoken at length in the Chamber, and also I think we've written to the Minister, and it's something we will keep, certainly in terms of the ask from yourselves, I'm sure we'll still be committed to. William?
Mr. Chairman, again, there's sympathy for your position within the committee here. You mentioned robots for picking mushrooms, and I know labour is a big issue. Is there any robots already available in Northern Ireland, or
it's still ongoing? Still ongoing. Like, it's nothing really just concrete yet.
If it was successful, it would make a big change to the situation for you, labour-wise, would it?
Labour-wise, it would make a huge difference to us. But the problem with it is the cost factor. Obviously, that's going to come into the equation. There are Monaghan mushrooms in Monaghan. They're trialling 4 robots now. Each of them robots is 175,000. So
it's big money.
So to convert our industry on that particular robot scheme, and we don't know if it's working or not. That's why they're trying it in Monaghan to retrofit that into our industry. Right now, it would cost 64 million. Now that would not be done overnight. That would be a phased-in process over a number of years. So
it's not going to happen tomorrow.
It'll not happen tomorrow. No, unfortunately not. I wish robots were here.
There is a market like for UK mushrooms. Like the supermarkets would rather buy UK produce as buy ROI or buy Polish. But the problem is, it's just that with the schemes that they have in the ROI, they're more competitive. They can sell mushrooms cheaper than what we can sell mushrooms for.
And the consumer likes to get it as cheap as possible.
Yeah.
They want a good product, but they also like.
They do like the UK produce, but it's,
It's 27% of mushrooms comes from Poland that are sold in the UK. There's now 6% comes from the Netherlands.
There's global competition really, even for moving the short shelf life product. It's
the competition from Europe, and what we're hit with is to support these other countries. ROI does 25% of UK mushrooms, but it's also everybody's pushing the peat-free route, and it will be a massive thing for us, and we are working very hard on it. And there is mushrooms in supermarkets right now that are peat-free, but there's a cost factor in it. But the legislation comes in for Northern Ireland and the UK to go peat-free, and we're all for it. But we're taking 60% of mushrooms from outside of the UK. So that's going to be a problem.
Nicola, have you any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your presentation there. It's good to get even better understanding of the challenges you're facing. I suppose, as you say there, John, about the storm last week, just more kind of heartache and issues for yourselves to deal with. So wish you all the best with that there. You actually covered what I just wanted to talk about the challenges I suppose you face with the south of Ireland, obviously being aligned with EU and how that maybe affects the competitiveness of yourself in the north as a mushroom grower. So I suppose you've already touched upon that there and those issues. One thing I do want to ask you about, it was already mentioned too about your ongoing engagement with the department, and you've spoken to Rosemary a few times and to different officials in that there. But in regards to your suggestion to the committee about tabling an amendment to the clause and to ensure that 4.1% is actually tabled there in the legislation, have you spoken to the department in that regard? Or is it that more as a consultation response, or what kind of response have you had from them in that regard?
No, we haven't spoken to the department. What we're trying to do as an industry is we're trying to come up with a solution ourselves that'll help the department. You know, because if the bill passes the way it passes right now, it leaves that our support could be withdrawn from the mushroom industry, and we don't know where we stand at the end of the day. If that happens, and I'm speaking to Teagasc in the south, they reckon that the mushroom industry will be finished in the north in the next 5 to 10 years, because there'll be no investment done on it, and whatever houses is there, whatever quality controls is there, that'll just dwindle away until such times as we disappear. So that's where we asked for the amendment for the 4.1%, so that we could have a baseline, so that we have that funding is secure for us as an industry. We also asked for the removal of a replacement of the proposal to repeal the fruit and veg aid scheme, because if we repeal it or revoke the fruit and veg aid scheme, where does that leave us? It leaves us with nothing. And if a new scheme comes in place, and again, I'll use the horticultural pilot scheme as an example. I went to a meeting whenever the horticultural pilot scheme was announced in May 24, and it was said it was going to be live in autumn 24. Now we're talking about autumn 25 before it's going to be live. So therefore, that's a delay of 12 months. You know, and at this stage now, we don't know what's coming down the line. If they do, what the department's plans are for if the fruit and veg scheme is repealed, what comes next? We don't know, and that's not going to be immediate. It's not going to happen on the 1st of January in 2026. It could be 2027, 2028 before we get funding.
I just want to...
Sorry, Nicola. Sorry, Nicola. I forgot the...
Sorry, Nicola. Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. No, that's all right. Thank you for that. That's okay, Chair. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nicola. Very sorry about that. Patsy?
I was just going to come in at the end, maybe on a few things just to...
Yeah, that's okay, because I'm going to wrap it up shortly anyway, just in terms of trying to capture...
Someone else is to speak there first.
Sorry?
If someone else...
No, I think that's everything. That's everybody done.
Oh, right. No, I was just going to suggest on that horticultural scheme, if we could establish from the department, 1, the delay, and 2, is it likely to be any sort of support for mushroom growers contained within that? That's just what I was going to suggest there. And likewise, Chair, it might be useful if we could contact the Executive Office just around that whole issue of labour and what they've done since, and there any sort of communication, comms, meetings with the Home Office around those issues, because it would be unusual indeed it would if there hadn't been any contact established, because if it hasn't been drawn to their attention, well, they'll presume there is no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, no issue with that. If members have any issue, no issue. The first point's well made. I know that you've given a good understanding of where you've engaged with it, where it is at the moment. And yeah, I saw you shaking your head just in regard to the potential for mushroom.
As far as the potential for the mushrooms in the horticultural pilot scheme, we have met with Calvary, you know, and Calvary have admitted to us in meetings that is absolutely no benefit to the mushroom industry. Now we're accounting for 50% of the mushroom industry, or horticulture. That's absolutely no benefit to us. This hasn't been relayed on to the minister, because the minister keeps pushing us towards the horticultural pilot scheme, and that's the problem that we have.
Right.
We're stating things, but they're not being relayed on.
Okay, Patsy's point well made then, Patsy, in terms of the potential letter from the committee, just to get that cleared up with the Minister, because sometimes...
One thing, and the Minister's saying another.
Yeah, sometimes...
Because if there's an information or communications gap, that's a fault of the department then.
Before we move on to a second point, are you content with enough detail on that, Clerk? Yeah?
Nick, did you get enough notes?
Yeah, enough detail on it? Okay, yeah. And then the second point is we have been engaged, Patsy, with regard to the labour shortage stuff, but take your point, and we'll maybe just revive the update. There is a letter in the pack there from the Executive Office in regard to their understanding dated the 25th of January, I think. But it's something we'll be very alive to. Going forward, the robotics is really important. But just before we do close the meeting, just to be fair, because you've come up and given us your time, you have 4 asks down there. 2 of them don't sit with the legislation, the bottom 2, because one is the labour shortages, which we're obviously engaged in, and we will support that endeavour. The other one then is the safety net and that shock piece. We were speaking about that in the wider agri horticulture earlier, so that if you're happy enough, we will ensure that your comments today are encapsulated in anything that we're doing in regard to that shock and netting. And if there's anything else that you think, obviously you can feed in. The top 2 then, which is tabling amendment to clause 1 and then removing the power to revoke. I'm just going to ask you, because obviously the committee at our next session or whatever will have to discuss that and come to a position. Is there anything else that you would require of us or think we should be alert to? Specifically, I'm going to be honest, specifically in regard to the legislation.
No, specifically in regards to the legislation, obviously we'll put in our written things. So anything we've missed today, we'll put in writing for you.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming down. And I know you're up to your eyes with, especially, and I'm sorry to hear about the damage being caused by the storm on your...
Yeah, it's 7 o'clock on Friday morning. Myself and my uncle and my sister were trying to hold down covers from blowing away. We wouldn't bring any workers in for safety reasons, but
yeah, I get that. No, it was actually scary. Like, I mean, it's okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you
for your time. Okay, thank you. Members, we will not be broadcasting beyond 1:45, so we will be wrapping the meeting up in the next 10 minutes, okay? If that's because we run out of broadcast space, okay? Members, agenda item 9.1, refer to correspondence memo at page 165 of the pack, and correspondence items at page 166 to 517 of the pack, and pages 21 to 93 of table papers. Members, I refer you to the clerk's memo from the clerk to the Committee for Finance dated 23rd of January, pages 166 to 167 of the pack, with supporting information at pages 168 to 191 of the pack. The memo is in relation to NICS sickness levels. Members, the Committee for Finance had requested the information from the Department of Finance in respect of any relationship between sick absence, staff vacancies, the level of staff complaints, and also temporary promotions within the NICS. At its meeting on the 22nd of January, the Committee agreed to forward the information it received in response to other statutory committees. The Department of Finance has indicated that there does not appear to be any obvious direct link between the ratio of vacancies, staff and post when compared to stress-related absence. It also stated that the incidence of staff absence whilst the complaint processes are ongoing is high, and that staff on temporary promotions lost on average 2.5 working days due to sickness compared to 6.8 working days lost by those staff not on temporary promotions. Have members any comments that they want to make on this information? And I would also just caveat that when we're interpreting statistics, we need to apply another logic sometimes and ask other questions. Members content? Thank you. Members, I refer to the clerk's memo from the clerk to the Committee for Finance dated the 23rd of January, pages 191 to 192. This is in relation to the Budget 25 round robin exercise. Department of Finance published the draft executive budget for 25 to 26 on the 19th of December, which is out for public consultation until the 13th of March. The Finance Committee is currently seeking all committees' views on the respective departments' 25-26 budget, with any issues that the committee have about their department's 24 to 25 budget position and the management required by 28th of February. Members, the Finance Committee has noted that this draft budget is not explicitly linked to the programme for government, and what has been published has not offered significant detail on the strategic priorities direction of departments. However, it is hopeful that departments' budgets will be linked to the programme for government going forward as part of the outworkings of the Budget Sustainability Plan and Budget Improvement Plan. The intention is to bring forward a take-note debate on the 25-26 budget in which committee chairs can participate prior to the Easter recess. Members, we have requested a briefing on the draft budget on the 6th of February and we're waiting for confirmation. Any comments that you want to make on that at the moment? No? Okay, members, 9.4, I refer you to the report, pages 193 to 371 of the pack, entitled the Annual Report and Accounts for the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority for years ending 31st of March 22, 31st of March 23. Are you content to note, as last week we did consider correspondence from DARE regarding the potential extension via an LCM to Northern Ireland and provisions in the UK Employment Rights Bill, which would abolish the GLA and remove GLAA and remove its enforcement plans under the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Members, 9.5, I refer to pages 372 to 467 of the pack for correspondence from the Department dated 23rd of January and to the report entitled Lock Agency's Annual Report and Accounts for 2023, covering the period 1st of January 23 to 31st December 23. The Locks Agency is an agency of the Foyle, Carlingford and Irish Lights Commission. Members, the Locks Agency aims to provide sustainable social, economic and environmental benefits through the effective conservation, management, promotion and development of the fisheries and marine resources of the Foyle and Carlingford areas. Are members content to note, and the Locks Agency is on our list of agreed future briefings, so we'll be able to get a good briefing from them when we get that agreed to date.
Agreed.
Okay, members, 9.6 I refer to correspondence from the Department dated 23rd of January, pages 468 to 471 of the pack in relation to the Environmental Noise Regulations 2006, round 4 publication of strategic noise maps. Members, the Environmental Noise Directive 2002-49 EC was transposed to Northern Ireland through the Environmental Noise Regulations Northern Ireland 2006. These regulations provide the competent authorities to undertake noise mapping of certain sources of environmental noise, namely roads, railways, airports, industry, every 5 years or in the interim. If a major development occurs which affects the noise situation, the NIEA is the competent authority to manage these noises from industry. Members, the regulations designate the competent authorities to manage noise from each of the sources and place a duty on them to make a map to identify agglomerations, major roads, major railways and major airports, and to make them available for the public. Based on the results of these maps, they must develop and action plans. Members, 44 maps have been produced in this noise mapping round, the majority of which cover the Belfast agglomeration. An example of a strategic noise map for industry noise produced under round 4 noise mapping contract is included in your packs at Appendix A. These maps will now be certified and approved or adopted and will be published on the DARE website along with a set of supporting documents in the coming weeks. Do members have any comments they want to make? Content to note. Thank you. Members, I refer you to the Clerk's memo from the Clerk to the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee dated 24th of January, pages 472 of the pack in the Democratic Scrutiny Committee Inquiry Report, 66, page 22-24, pages 473, 492 of the pack. This is in relation to the Regulation EU 2024-3015 of the European Parliament and of the Council 27th of November 2004, amending Regulations EU 2016-2031, the Plant Health Regulations. Members, at its meeting on the 23rd of January, the Democratic Scrutiny Committee agreed to publish a report of its conclusions from its inquiry into the Replacement EU Act regulation. Members, the Replacement EU Act amends Regulation EU Plant Health Regulations, which is the basic legal framework for EU plant health policy. It establishes protective measures against pests, including rules on classification criteria for pests, requirements for imports and movements of plants in the EU, and reporting and certification obligations. It also amends the EU 2017-625, the Official Control Regulations, which regulates the movement of plants, plant health and protection products. Members, the Replacement EU Act aims to improve the application and enforcement of the Plant Health Regulation and the Official Controls Regulation by streamlining and simplifying reporting requirements and promoting standardised and digitalised procedures. Members, having considered evidence received from the UK Government, DARE and responses to its Citizen Space Survey, the Democratic Scrutiny Committee concluded that the Replacement EU Act would not have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Any comments? Are you content to leave? Content to leave. Members, I refer you to a Clerk's memo from the Clerk of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee dated 24th of January, pages 493 of the pack, and pages 494 to 513. Members, at its meeting on 23rd of January, the Democratic Scrutiny Committee agreed to publish a report on its conclusions on its inquiry into the Replacement EU Act Regulation 2024-3110 of the European Parliament and of the Council of 27th of November 2024, laying down harmonised rules for the marketing of construction products and repealing Regulation EU number 305. 2011. The Replacement Act aims to address bottlenecks in the functioning of the standardisation process, clarify how the EU's power to regulate the market of construction products interacts with the right of Member States to set their own requirements, enhance market surveillance and strengthen enforcement powers, improve the availability of environmental and product safety information, and establish a digital product passport system for construction products. Members, having considered the evidence received from the UK Government, DERA, DOF and DFI, the response to its Citizen Space Survey, the information received from industry associations, public bodies and the DFE, the committee concluded that the Replacement EU Act would not have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Have members any comments that they want to make? Content to note. Okay, members, I refer to correspondence pages 514 to 517 of the PAC Investment Strategy Northern Ireland, the ISNI Delivery Tracking Data System. Members, the DTS is an executive initiative designed to collate up-to-date information on the status of projects and their underlying investment activities, and where appropriate, disseminate this to the public in an open and transparent manner. Have members any comments or content to note? I know that one's particularly of interest to Patsy. Members, I refer you to the 30th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules dated 27th of January 2025, pages 21 to 29 of the table papers. The report refers to the following SRs of the relevant to the committee that are subject to negative resolution procedure: SR 2024-204, the Marine Licensing Application Fees Amendment Regulations; SR 2024-211, the Direct Payments to Farmers Cross Compliance Amendment Regulations; SR 2024-212, the Environmental Protection Single Use Vape Regulations, Northern Ireland 2024. No statutory rules in this report are drawn to the special attention of the Assembly. Are you content to note? Thank you, members. 9.11, I refer you to correspondence at pages 30 to 65 of the table papers from the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels regarding this report for October 2024. The areas of interest for this committee are mainly under Section 3, that being agricultural issues and environmental issues. Are members content to note that? And commend the good work that Aidan and his team do out there. 9.12, members, I refer you to the Clerk's memo dated 20th of January from the Clerk to the Committee for Infrastructure, page 66 of the table papers, and to the raised paper, pages 67 to 70 of the table papers. This is in relation to compensation for agricultural landowners affected by construction of new roads in Northern Ireland. At our concurrent meeting with the Committee for Infrastructure on the 12th of November, we had a briefing from the Ulster Farmers Union in relation to this matter. The raised briefing paper sets out the compulsory purchase process for major road development and examines the principles of compensation for agricultural landowners subject to vesting order. The issue is considered within the context of the ongoing A5 Western Transport Corridor. Any comments at this stage? Content to note. Papers are there, guys. Members, I refer you to the pivotal report entitled The Review of the First Year of the Restored NI Executive Report, pages 79 to 93 of the table papers. Are you content to note? Any comments? I commented on Monday night. You can watch it and play on the View from Stormont. That was particularly good. Anyway, agenda item 10, Forward Work Programme. Members, at Forward Work Programme can be found in the table papers at pages 95 to 98. Do you have any comments? Are you agreed that it's published?
Yep.
Thank you, committee. Any other business?
Nope.
Outstanding. Agenda item 12, date and time next meeting. Our next meeting is on Thursday, the 6th of February 2025, Parliament Buildings. Congratulations, you are now happily retired, Gillian. Thank you.
Committee Room 21. Sound.